meeting of the Lane County Budget Committee to order. And I see all members of the committee present with the exception of Chris Hazen, who contacted us earlier and said he was under the weather and would not be attending today. So let's move forward into committee business. Before we go there, Christine, anything from staff?
The only thing I'll mention to you, because we haven't been in person in a while, is that you have note cards in front of you for any questions that might come up. I mean, you'll be asking questions during the presentations as well, but if there's something that you can't get answered, you can write on those, and we actually put your names on them, so I think that's it.
Excellent, thank you. Any other topics to bring up from the committee? Seeing none, we will move forward. Ms. Perlow, take it away, please.
Thank you. Wow, I have an extra 2 minutes. We're only together for 22 minutes, so my plan is to go through the slides really quickly, put an emphasis on what our challenges are right now, and give you plenty of time for questions. So, please let this work. No, that's the laser. Here we go. All right, so the DA's office is made up of 3 divisions. Criminal prosecution, which you all would, I assume that's the one thing you think of when you think of a DA's office. We also have a family law division, which collects child support for Lane County children, about $20 million a year. And then we have a 3rd division called support services, which includes the death investigators. That's a topic all into itself. Victim Services, who provides supports the constitutional rights of victims of crime, and then our clerical support for the criminal division. Here's where the money comes from. As you can see, we are almost, well, these grants relate to family law and some of the other money that we receive from the VAWA and VOCA to support the domestic violence team, victim services, and family law. What doesn't really show is that we are mostly general fund. We collect about $300,000 a year, a little over $300,000 a year in discovery fees to try to cover those costs, and we'll talk about discovery when we get into our challenges. Our expenditures, as everybody is experiencing, the costs of personnel are going up dramatically. That's where most of our budget goes, is into the people costs, materials and services. We've been, because we haven't been in trial for the last 2 years very much, we've not used expert witnesses, hotels. There's been no training in person, so we haven't had a lot of travel or training expense that way. We've been doing it all online. So this is a prediction, but given that we have no idea what's happening with the cases that are set for trial, this is just a guess. This is about the criminal division and who staffs it. It's in the budget materials, and I'm just going to keep moving. Here are our main challenges. Recruiting. We lost 3 secretaries of 4 in family law between last fall and early this year. 1 to not wanting to get vaccinated, 1 to a retirement, and 1 to DOJ, where she was going to be paid more money and have a different title. We have lost 4 attorneys in the criminal division. I'm currently recruiting for a DDA 2. We have 1, 2, 3, and senior prosecutor. I'm trying to recruit for a 2, which is somebody in about the 3 to 5 year range of experience, because I'm chock-a-block full of people with no experience. And then our treatment court prosecutor just left due to trauma. So, and I have had no applications for those 2 positions. And honestly, given the state of things and the workload, it is literally a house of cards that we are quite worried if we lose any more lawyers in the criminal division, we are going to be in a lot of trouble. And so finding ways to keep morale up, manage workload are our top priorities. But it really it is a challenge right now. The reference to 600 cases awaiting trial, that is because we didn't go to trial very much between March of 2020 and just opening up this year. And while there may have been reference to more cases going to trial in the first 3 months of this year than all of last year, that includes cases that don't involve my office. And so we had 64 cases go to trial last year, and we've had 27 so far this year. And what happens is cases are getting set for trial 12, 15 a day on the docket, and maybe 2 will go, and the rest of them are set out. And so while we look at this 600 case backlog, it is a tremendous amount of pressure to resolve cases because we can't try all of them. The pre-trial release of 125 violent offenders has left us with 125 people with no motivation to go to trial or resolve their cases because they're out in the community right now. So there are a lot of motions to postpone up to the end, and when the court is finally saying no more postponements, that's when somebody's asking for a deal in a case. We've had other challenges with making sure the cases were properly disclosed to the defense, and we'll get to that when we're looking for a couple of paralegals. That's barely going to make a dent in the workload, but at this point, the lawyers with all of these cases pending have no ability to track to make sure that the police agencies haven't added more reports or evidence to their system and not notified us of that. And so then the lawyer is getting ready for trial and doesn't know there's more material out there that hasn't been disclosed. It's just, it's not a tenable way, it's not a professional way for a prosecutor's office to be able to function. And so we are struggling. And the complexity of the cases, the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court are changing the rules on us all the time. You know, if you are playing a sporting game and you know what the rules are, it's pretty easy to follow those. But when your rules are changing all the time and your cases are coming back because there's been a change in the law from the Court of Appeals, it's just, it's hard to advise law enforcement what best practices are. It's hard for our lawyers to prepare a case, not worried that it's going to be coming back for something that you can't even anticipate.
Do you want questions at the end, or can I ask
You
you
can
something?
ask the question.
Can you give an example of what some of those kinds of rule changes are that have happened?
I'd be happy.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Search
I
and
had one
seizure.
myself.
Oh,
Yeah. 2017, I tried a very sad and very ugly murder case involving an individual who, at the time he was arrested, asked a friend to ultimately call a lawyer for him. He said it in Spanish. The officer who had arrested him knew enough Spanish to know that he had just asked his friend to call a lawyer. That was relayed to the detective who was to interview him. The detective confronted him about the statement about wanting a lawyer. After going around and then basically re-advising him of his Miranda rights and explaining his various options, at that time the gentleman agreed to go upstairs and be interviewed. He, after several renditions of the story, ultimately admitted to having killed this woman and buried her under the floorboards of her house. We used that evidence after long motions in trial. The Court of Appeals then essentially changed the rules regarding invocations after the case had already been litigated and had been up on appeal, to suggest that the detective, who was essentially retelling this guy his rights and explaining his various options, had gone too far in explaining his rights, therefore confusing the issues for him. And so the case had to come back and the confession was thrown out, forcing us into a position where we lost not only the confession but a bunch of evidence that flowed therefrom.
And a witness.
And a witness. And so we had to, when it came back, we ultimately had to negotiate the case for a very unsatisfactory resolution. as a result of that change in the law.
I can give you another example. Very recently, it has been established law that somebody who is a defendant in a criminal case who has prior convictions and testifies that those convictions, if they're felonies or involve integrity, that those convictions are admissible. Well, case goes up to the Court of Appeals, and now the state of the law, which has been for over 40 years, the state of the law now is, well, no, convictions are prejudicial, and so a judge needs to do a balancing test. Out of nowhere. I mean, so those cases where prior convictions were admitted without the judge doing a balancing test.
Is that a single judge that makes a determination?
That's a panel at the
A
Court of
panel.
Appeals, but one of them writes the opinion. The rules are changing constantly. Well, and then Ramos, which was the unanimous jury situation where Oregon law had been that you could have 10 on anything other than murder, convict or acquit, and then the Ramos decision came out, and the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court have returned all of the cases that originally were active appeals for a determination or for a retrial. And the legislature's been considering having all of those convictions come back. And if the defendant can, by a preponderance, show that there was less than a unanimous jury. So it's hard when you don't know what tomorrow's rules are going to be.
And a bunch of decisions that ultimately immediately impact how policing is done in our community. Unavoidable lull was another one that they got rid of last year, where officers can't engage in casual conversation during a traffic stop with a person because it may lead to other investigative information, or just recently a total change to the automobile exception, which is an exception to the warrant requirement. These are things that law enforcement agencies then, we learn about them when the Court of Appeals or Supreme Court issues their opinions, but then this has to filter down to law enforcement, usually through trainings that we would give them at various times. It's coming so fast and furious at us, these changes, that we don't even have time to debrief those officers and get them to change their behavior on the roadway before the next opinion's coming in that's ultimately going to change the direction of their investigations entirely. So we're not doing as good a job as we should be to keep them apprised of changes in the law so that they're doing things according to the law during the course of their investigations.
We just don't have the capacity to be doing more training and constant and up to date.
And those kind of changes can happen anytime. It's not
Right.
like legislative changes where there's a session and then you have some time in between where you know things aren't going to change.
Right, but even then, the legislature will pass legislation and it won't be clear how to implement it, and so you have to have work groups and more meetings about how to do it, because, these are citizens that don't practice law for the most part, and even the ones that do practice law often don't anticipate the impacts down the road. And the other thing, it's coming up again in a later slide, is the legislature has expanded the ability of people to get their convictions set aside, expunged.
Mhm.
And so we have had, in the first 3 months of this year, 100 more of those than all of last year. And each one of them gets set for hearing and requires somebody going and getting the records and looking for all of that. And it's just without any additional funding, even if we had funding, I'm not sure how long it would take us to hire and train people to do the work. But the lawyer that's doing it is somebody who retired, and I am begging him not to stop coming in and doing that work for us, because we just can't absorb it with the resources we have. Okay, family law, I already told you, lost 3 of their staff. They're in the hiring process right now. They're back to 2 legal secretaries right now, looking for 2 more. last year, despite all of those challenges in COVID, they still collected about $20 million in child support for Lane County kids. It's just amazing the work that that group, that small group does. And it's 2/3 grant funded by the federal government, so everything they do is a great return on investment for what Lane County puts into it. Support Services Division. The thing I really want to point out about that is death investigations. Our budget is set, but they're in contract right now. Well, I don't know how I got in the body transporting business, I really don't. But deceased individuals that need to go to the morgue, Lane County is now paying for. And nobody really wants to do that work. It doesn't pay enough to have people on call. But it is better, it was determined it's better to increase the contract rate with the person, the company that's providing that service now than to have it be a Lane County employee. So that budget is gonna have to be increased. We added a 4th death investigator who starts, we've been filling that with temporary help currently, but the 4th death investigator starts just about now, in the month of May. And overdose deaths, car crashes, violent crime, it's another overwhelming circumstance in our communities. And so fortunately we were able to add a 4th person because we've been relying on 3 people and paid people who are just taking call for us, nurses, EMTs.
Commissioner Clark?
The death investigation is a DA's function then, in this county,
It is.
and not in other counties.
In a couple of counties it is, in most counties it is not a DA function. It wasn't always a DA function here, it used to be with Health and Human Services. Frank Grady was the sole employee of the county at the time and went to Doug Harkleroad, who was the DA at the time, and said, can we please move into your office? And then, Doug went to the board and said, hey, we're willing to take this on. But at that time, you don't need a whole explanation of what's happening to the funeral industry and how it's not making the kind of, people aren't having funerals anymore, they're mostly getting cremated. And so the industry isn't making as much money, and so when they advertise a rate, it doesn't include the cost of transporting the body wherever it needs to go. And nobody wants to be the on-call funeral home anymore, and so that's how it got to the point where the county absorbed the cost of the movement.
And then Doug kind of took it on his shoulders at the time he was the DA. I'm trying to grasp the magnitude of this. The death investigation include apparent homicides, suicides, accidents, unattended deaths. Is that unattended by a physician or just they died when they were all alone?
Unattended death means that they were alone when they died. They weren't on hospice. If you're on hospice or if you've been in the hospital for 24 hours, then we don't take jurisdiction of it.
Okay, all right. Sorry to slow things down. I'm really curious, just wondering why it's in the DA's now. I guess I'll talk to Doug next time I see him.
What were you thinking? Right, it is, particularly now that there's so much emphasis on drug overdose and suicide and the increased numbers there. That really is a public health issue.
So if I may,
Yes.
it seems to me that might have been a very logical decision at the time, but so much has changed.
Yes.
As you're describing.
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's true. A lot has changed just in the makeup of our community and the numbers of deaths that we're seeing are unprecedented.
They're dying, they've never died before, as my father.
All right, so we have included in the proposed budget 2 paralegals, and that it really is not going to make a dent in the circumstances that we have, but the purpose of those 2 paralegals will be to help with trial preparation, making sure that all of the evidence has been accounted for, that all the reports and the video have been disclosed to help support the lawyers. We can't lawyer our way out of this. Paralegals are a much more cost-effective tool as well. This is how our office fits into the strategic plan. These are our key initiatives. Really, the specialty courts and are something I'm particularly pleased with how those are working. Tomorrow is a treatment court graduation, and there is a woman who's graduating tomorrow who was at the Department of Corrections, pregnant at the start of the pandemic, and the Department of Corrections wanted her released to have her baby. And we made arrangements. I am very happy to say that this turns out as a success story because I'm the one who spearheaded getting her into our treatment court here. Instead of releasing her to Douglas County to have her baby, to release her to Lane County, get her in her treatment court, get her supported, and she is graduating tomorrow. Here are some numbers. I've talked a lot about our future challenges and our opportunities. We, in 2012, lost a third of our staff. And, I mean, that's what happened to the county. And so there was a lot of work to get some grant funding into Lane County. And when I became DA, I worked really hard to get us out of our siloed position and be a really good partner so that we could amass some of these grants to pay for different programs in Lane County. And at that time, it funded 2 district attorneys, or deputy district attorneys for our prison diversion program, treatment court lawyer, and then we got a grant from Odot to pay for a investigator to do follow-up on traffic crashes and DUIs and go out and find people who didn't come to court to be held accountable for making our highways unsafe. That grant money has been slowly going away, and I mean that was predictable. CJC isn't responsible for distributing the Justice Reinvestment Initiative money, and little by little, you know, the promises that were made by several legislatures ago that, well, if we don't have to build a new prison, here's the savings, that money's going to go back out to the counties to support these programs. Well, you know, the funding stream has changed, and so the county is now paying out of the general fund for positions that were previously grant funded. I am back at work trying to get money from Odot, and it may be a collaboration in the whole traffic fatality program to put that together, but there's a new coordinator of the highway safety grants for Odot, and they've initiated those. The treatment court prosecutor was not funded after June of 2022, and the Lane County Treatment Court Group appealed that, and it looks like we're going to get that money back because the prosecutor is a key function of the treatment court success. So it looks like even, and it's best practice, and it was the number one thing Lane County was requesting be funded. So that looks like the appeal process will play out and will be successful, I hope. Video is great. Video is fantastic for prosecution purposes. You can find out what happened at the scene, capture statements, capture somebody's level of impairment or not. But Eugene Police shows up to a scene, 12 officers come on scene, every one of them's got body cam footage, every one of them's got an in-car video, and all of that video has to be managed and reviewed if the case is going to go to trial. Let's see, you know about the 4th death investigator, and I don't know, if you haven't had an opportunity to have the full sight, smell, sensory experience of the courthouse, I would be happy to take you on a tour. It really is not good. For one thing, the court has taken part of our space over the course of the years, so we have no ability to hire more people. God, sorry, I'm 2 minutes over time. So anyway, we really need to do something to make space efficient, clean, and useful.
Thank you. Questions for the DA? Yes, Commissioner Brosevich.
So, one of the things that pandemic and the delayed court cases and all that means we have far less people under supervision
Yes.
across the county and across the state. And we're staring at a hole in our community corrections funding. And it impacts also that same percentages is used for JRI and all. That I don't know if we'll probably hear from PMP about this later, but it starts with the DA and the court system, getting these people through the system, convicted and either placed on parole, probation. So we have enough people under supervision to get the funding to fund a system that's doing some really great work. I mean, our community corrections system here in Lane County is state of the art. People come to study what we're doing. We're fortunate to have great partners like sponsors. But can you speak a little bit about the public defender crisis and how that's impacting the court and your ability to move things? I know it's not the DA's office, but I think this has a big impact.
I think that no great crisis should be a lost opportunity, and honestly, the public defenders helped create this crisis by delaying cases as long as they possibly could, and having the 125 violent offenders released from jail and no incentive to move those cases means that those lawyers continue to have those people on their caseload while new cases are coming in. And so I'm part of a subcommittee that's going to discuss this, but in Oregon, public defense is number 2 in the nation. Indigent defense funding is number 2 in the nation. It's not a money issue, it is a mismanagement of the money that they have issue to a large extent. The line attorneys are not getting the bulk of the money that's getting funded from the legislature. It's going into the appellate procedure. The appellate lawyers are private lawyers who are billing lots of money. Post-conviction costs a ton of money. Private lawyers, when they don't have what we have here, a public defender dedicated office, they are contracting with private lawyers to do that work. And so all of these different kind of contracts are costing a fortune, and they don't appear to have a really good handle on where the money's going and what it's going for. And hiring experts in cases, not every, but probably 85-90% of the cases require some kind of mental health expert now being retained by the defense. And so it's a crisis that was a great opportunity to seek more funding and hopefully to get a handle on it and get the contracts under control and get the system into a better state. And I'm happy to participate in the solution for that. But at the same time that public defense is getting all of this publicity, what do you think is happening in the prosecutor's offices, where they are funded far less than public defense statewide, where our caseloads are, our public defender's office handles 65% of the cases, and the rest of them are either going to the consortium of their lawyers or privately retained. We have 100% of the cases. We have the same number of cases that aren't going through the system, and that the lawyers are preparing for trial just not to have it go, and then preparing for trial again. It was designed to break the system, and it did a great job.
Other questions? Commissioner Farr.
Just a telegraph, I'm gonna write a question for you regarding the 125 cases that are of the pretrial release.
Yes.
And you say violent offenders. That'll be in the form of a written question, so we don't take time here at this meeting, but you
I
can.
bet the sheriff, since they were released from his jail,
I'm
might be able to.
I'm gonna ask him the same question,
answer
so,
that.
but I won't, won't belabor the time that
Okay.
we're having this meeting with
Okay.
the answer to that question at this point.
Right, and I'm
Got
happy
Senate
to
Bill
answer
48 from last
questions.
session.
I'm sorry I have gone over time. I'm very passionate about my office and the work we do, and so it's hard to shut me up.
Excellent.
Well,
Thank you, Ms. Perlow, and we appreciate all the work you're doing, and it does sound like the demand is increasing somewhat without a corresponding ability to deal with it. So, thank you for your time.
but Chris, you
Thanks for
nodded
the
when you said
chocolate.
it's hard to shut me up. What's up?
Getting him in trouble.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Sheriff?
Yes, the sheriff is watching from the other room. He'll be
Thank
right
you.
down.
So he knows he's supposed to be here.
Last long session, Senate Bill 48 required pretrial release, but didn't fully fund it. Required pretrial services and electronic monitoring programs, but did not fund it. So that's one of the issues we're trying to deal with on PSCC. We just had a PSCC budget committee yesterday, Monday. Wednesday, yesterday. Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to think of, it wasn't a board day, it was in between, yesterday, because we were trying to figure out how we're gonna fill we're behind, we're way overspending that portion of the community corrections budget right now,
Nice.
because everybody's going on pretrial release.
And even with the savings of having closed
There is
the,
another chair that could be pulled up right
anything
there.
more people in
If you
the
wanted to
just
just
not making up
handle
quarterly
bylaws.
different pots of money.
So
Different pots
we're
of
in
money.
a hot seat.
CCC was
Okay.
mostly being used for.
We'll make it
RMAP.
easier.
All right.
For, right.
Here.
Yeah.
Perfect.
All right. I know.
And the RLAN program, they moved that out of the CCC and more into sponsors.
Sponsors.
Welcome, Sheriff Harold.
Thanks, Chair Bodman. It is so great to be in one room with you all. I'm super thankful that we get to do this way. So,
Paul.
so my name's Cliff Earl, and I'm the Lane County Sheriff, and I'm privileged to get to do that job. Super proud of the 300 plus folks we've got in the office. We have heard the feedback from the group over the last couple of years, even though the technology made it hard to hear sometimes. But so we'll try to do, and I know there's no new committee members, so we'll try to do a little less overview of our structure and what we do, and a little more highlighting of challenges and whatnot today. I am super privileged to work with a fantastic team, and so you're actually going to hear more from them than me today. And with that, I'm just going to hand it right over to the Chief Deputy, and we'll dive in.
Good afternoon, everybody. I just can become familiar with the clicker first. Okay, I think I got it. My name's Carl Wilkerson. I'm the Chief Deputy of the Sheriff's Office, and I'm super honored and privileged to have the opportunity to share a little bit about our office. Super proud of the services we provide to our community, and super proud of the people that provide those services. So, let's get rolling. Sheriff's Office is actually made up of 4 divisions. The Office of the Sheriff, which consists of the Sheriff and his Executive Assistant, the Operations Support Division, the Police Services Division, and the Corrections Division. Maybe. The way our office is funded is a big chunk of the general fund, the public safety levy that primarily funds our Corrections Division, and then we have a lot of grants and contracts with various entities throughout the state, county, and local system. Just to kind of show you the pie graph of how we're made up, we're now at the point where about 50%, a little over 50% is general fund, and then everything else from our grants and levies and contracts. Like the DA mentioned, the biggest chunk of our budget goes to personnel, which is our greatest resource. And then we have our M&S, which is a little high on paper because we also have things like our radio infrastructure and vehicles and things like that. I already covered that the Office of the Sheriff is the Sheriff. and his executive assistant.
Can I quote you?
Yeah, I'll even take a test on that. And so there's that. And then there's the division that I oversee, which is the Operations Support Division. These are kind of the unsung heroes that make up a big part of what we do and fulfill a lot of the statutory requirements that the Sheriff's Office is required to do, like CHL, fingerprinting. It makes up our dispatching, our training section, property evidence, so on and so forth. Frankly, these are the folks that allow us to provide public safety, because these are the people behind the scenes doing a lot of hard work. Future challenges. Much like law enforcement throughout the United States, recruitment and retention continues to be a challenge. Local law enforcement agencies are trying to recruit the same people the Sheriff's Office is at every level. They're trying to recruit dispatchers, records officers, property evidence technicians, fiscal people, and frankly, they're trying to steal our people from us as they do it. We are fortunate that we have a great culture and great people, and we're doing a pretty good job both recruiting and holding on to our people, but it still is a challenge as everybody's trying to come in behind us and take our people. That being said, so far, just this fiscal year, 21-22, we've hired 27 new employees. 1 communications officer, 5 records officers, 1 FSO, 1 administrative aide, 17 deputies, and 2 record supervisors. We still, as of looking at our budgeted positions list yesterday, still have 12 vacancies just at the deputy level with known retirements coming. So what me and Sheriff and I like to talk about, we're keeping our foot on the pedal, because if we don't, we're just going to get so far behind that we won't be able to provide the services that we are proud and honored to do. We have other challenges associated with, frankly, the space that the courthouse gives us. Our property evidence room was never designed to be a property evidence room. It is one of the spaces at the Sheriff's Office that has been flooded by sewage. Its footprint is ran out of space. We're trying to make do by storing some of our bulk storage and evidence off-site, but that's not best practice. That's not it's not really efficient when we have 1 property evidence technician to manage that. So that's a current challenge that we have, is we need to find a bigger footprint for our property evidence division. Our Sheriff's Office in itself, downstairs in the courthouse, it's ill-designed, never designed to be a police department, and it requires unsafe practices because of the building design. We literally have to walk people through a public access area who may be suspects or detainees in significant criminal cases like murders. And our staff has to wade through public areas just to use the restroom, because half of our workspace doesn't even have water. There's a need to increase security for the Sheriff's Office because of this design. And though on paper the footprint of the Sheriff's Office seems kind of big because of its design, because it's an old building, it was never designed to be what it is. It's kind of like what I like to refer to people as the Winchester House. It has doors that lead to nothing, windows to nothing, and it's never been designed to be what it is. So even though the footprint looks big, it's not adequate space because it's bad design. So the Sheriff's Office needs to find a way to increase security and change the footprint so that we can have a more professional and safer environment. Our lobby area is frankly inadequate and an embarrassment to what kind of services we provide the community. When people come into the Sheriff's Office for services, they come sit in a hallway where everybody else filters through, when maybe they're there to talk about private sensitive matters like a restraining order or civil issues that they have to do, which we're responsible for serving all those orders, because we are statutorily required to be the process server for the courts. Just this last week, one of our offices in the administrative building, or in the administrative side of the Sheriff's Office, because of the plumbing issues in the courthouse, flooded. So we were quickly trying to save computers and staff from getting the flooding from upstairs into our office. So the courthouse is ill-designed right now as it stands to be a safe or professional sheriff's office or police department of any kind. One of the challenges is, it's good news, is that we're coming out of the back end of the pandemic, but that's actually creating a lot of workload for our staff. In the last year, we had about 68,000 calls for service entered by our dispatchers. That's up by about 5,000 from last year, or the previous year. And if you equate that out, that's about 186 calls for service a day our dispatchers are entering into service. CHLs, the concealed handgun permits for new CHL applications and processing is almost doubled. We're over 3,000 this year, and it was about 1,500 the year before. Our civil unit has done about 1,200 more civil papers, which include protection orders, stalking orders, elder abuse orders, and restraining orders, evictions. We know that those numbers are going to continue to climb as we continue to move out of the pandemic. We do have some really good highlights, though, from this last year. Oregon law recently required that police agencies become accredited by an outside venue by, if you're our department size, by 2026. The Sheriff's Office kind of saw that roadmap coming, and we were fortunate enough to kind of have that foresight to apply for a grant for that process. And we're successful in obtaining that grant to pay for a project manager to work us through that process. So we are currently going through the accreditation process, and ultimately we're going to make sure that we are meeting our statutory requirement to obtain accreditation and continue our culture of professionalism as we move forward. Field-based reporting is actually kind of a really great thing that's happened as we continue to upgrade our records management system at the Sheriff's Office and our CAD system. This is a project where deputies are writing their reports electronically instead of doing it on pen and paper. And the good part about that is, as those reports are approved, they're immediately going into the system, and that allows us to go paperless, which is good for us and how many trees we will need to cut down based on how much paper volume we went through in the past. But it's also good because it immediately uploads the information into our databases, so the safety of people goes up, and our efficiency in sharing information and data loading is great. Sheriff's Office has been super fortunate this last year to receive a $5 million grant for radio infrastructure upgrades. We're in the midst of several radio projects, including improvements to our Dead Mountain site, radio site, which will improve our Oak Ridge area communications. I don't know if you guys recall, but previously that was quite an issue during the Snowmageddon and some of the fires, is that we didn't really have adequate radio communications up there, and that should be a significant improvement as we complete some of these projects. We've also taken over ownership of Badger Mountain and did some relocation of some of our radio channels to that area. This move has helped us move or fill a bunch of gaps in the Dunedin area, and then in the Badger Mountain area, and then the forested areas of Lorraine and Alma. This is not just beneficial to the Sheriff's Office as we do these radio upgrades, because it's a benefit to our partners in the LRIC program to include Lake County Public Works, as that they use our system as LRIC partners, and we've not only increased our safety by our radio upgrades and communication upgrades, but we're doing that for our partners who share in that system. I'm going to talk about training a little bit at the Sheriff's Office. We have a good chunk of employees who have statutory required trainings that we have to have because of our certifications. And so far, just this year, we have almost 27,000 hours of training completed by staff at our office. Within that same time period, within about the last year, we've had 34 different state certifications that have been granted to Sheriff's Office employees. So we're statutorily required in our sworn positions and our communication positions to be certified, and those certifications require specific trainings, and I think we try to do our best to go above and beyond what the minimums are so that our people are well trained. I have to brag about our fiscal people just a little bit, because beyond doing our AP and payroll and all those things that we think of them to do, They've been managing this slide says well over $6 million in grant funds, but the reality is that looks like it's a lot more than that when I'm actually looking at it. I should have changed the slide. It looks like it's in excess of $7 million, it's only gonna go up with our $5 million radio upgrades. Not only do they manage our grants, but they also manage grants for outside organizations like the Lane County Treatment Courts and LRIG and the City of Eugene JAG grant. So we're helping the City of Eugene. Go figure. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Lieutenant Rich Glessner, who's going to talk to you a little bit about the Police Services Division.
Thank you. All right. So when we're looking at the overview of the Police Service Division, I'd just like to point out the large number of contracts the Sheriff's Office has. 19 of our deputy positions are filled by these contracts. These are deputies that cannot generally be used in the main office patrol functions. And by contract, they're restricted to relatively small areas of the county with specific responsibilities, and they can only be used in a very limited capacity for main office patrol duties. That's the same one there. Make them move around a little bit. All right. When we talk about the main office patrol deputies, we all know how large and spread out this county is. With 3 deputies and a supervisor on duty at any given time, it's very common for our deputies to travel hundreds of miles each shift responding to calls for service. And this is truly keeping our response time at an unacceptable level. Our biggest challenge hasn't changed in about 20 years. Lane County Sheriff deputies cover 4,600 square miles. The population of our county has now grown to about 392,000 people. With the added 8 positions, the patrol division will be at 0.19 per 1,000 population. The state average of the Sheriff's Office has gone up to 0.36 per 1,000 population. And this just shows that we're doing the same amount of work with half the deputies of our other counties. The Sheriff's Office is currently conducting a lateral hiring process. We have 4 candidates that are nearing the end of that process. All the candidates currently either work or live here in Lane County. We're looking forward to offering them jobs probably by the end of this month. That will give us a jump start on filling the 8 positions. The added positions will be helpful. They will make a positive impact on the heavy workload that our patrol deputies are currently experiencing. It will allow us to increase from 2 deputies to 3 deputies on a graveyard shift. It will also allow us to dedicate a detective to investigate some of our felony property crimes. These added positions will take patrol to that 0.19 per 1,000 population that we mentioned. When we look at these numbers, the reality is those positions barely keep up with our population growth. The Sheriff's Office would still have to hire an additional 67 deputies to patrol just to reach that state average of 0.36. In 2020, we did receive the one-time funding that was allocated for 5 years to create 2 deputy positions. And that was each in West Lane and the McKenzie communities. We've already seen a tremendous positive impact from both these communities over the past 2 years. We've been getting lots of positive correspondence from community members throughout the years. And I know they really appreciate it. Lane County is currently seeing a large increase in our criminal drug enterprises. These are just a few pictures that have been taken within the last 6 months. These are all illegal drugs and guns that were found by deputies during their normal patrol duties. We do not have anybody that's currently dedicated to combat this growing problem. and we've been talking about this for a while. For years, Lane County has experienced a record number of traffic deaths. Due to the budget cuts in 2008 and 2012, Lane County Sheriff's Office was forced to dissolve our traffic team completely. Enforcement is one of the three needed components in reducing fatalities and significant injury crashes. Education and engineering being the other two. At our current staffing levels, the Sheriff's Office has very little, if any, time for traffic enforcement. The few times that it is possible is 2 to 3 times a year. We receive state traffic grant funding that allows us to focus on traffic enforcement, but that's only available on an overtime basis. I want to share with you some scary numbers. In 2020, we had 16 fatal crashes. In 2021, we nearly doubled that to 30. So far this year, we've had 13 traffic fatalities, and that puts us on track to triple the 2020 numbers. One of the biggest highlights this year was securing funding for the purchase and implementation of the body-worn camera program. This program will increase efficiency in case adjudication for the District Attorney's Office. It will increase information for criminal investigations, and it will also demonstrate our commitment to transparency to the public. We're all very excited to get this program up and running. And with that, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Lieutenant Moore.
Thank you. I'm Lieutenant Moore, Security Lieutenant at the jail. So our facility is 411 beds. Our two biggest contracts that we have right now are medical and mental health. Our medical is through WellPath, and our kitchen services are provided by Trinity. The alternative program section is managed out of our Defendant and Offender Management Center, also known as the DOMC. This is where we do the electronic monitoring program, the Sheriff's Work Crew, Community Service, and the sit-in program. So this current fiscal year, the program known as Electronic Surveillance Program was its first year as a standalone program. We've changed the name from ESP to EMP, or Electronic Monitoring Program. We believe the name more accurately reflects what we do in this program. EMP staff use GPS units, alcohol, smartphone apps, and things of that nature to monitor individuals in their program. Especially during our COVID, EMP has been significantly utilized by pretrial services. This current fiscal year, EMP has been averaging on any given day 92 individuals. In addition to our pretrial services, EMP has built partnerships with PMP, drug court, to encourage compliance in those programs. As PMP and drug court staff work with a variety of clients, all with different needs, provide them with another tool for success. Research shows that individuals who are able to maintain employment, housing, and community ties are less likely to reoffend. This year, LCSO selected to receive ARPA funds to address current architectural and technological deficits in our facility. Some of the highlights that we are hoping to accomplish include upgrades to our central control center, a new fire alarm panel, upgrades to our power supply, intercoms in all cells, which is something that other facilities are very common have. Replace our existing doors so that they all open remotely and don't necessarily have to be keyed by an individual. And we are hoping to install some non-contact interview booths that will allow adults in custody to enter into a private booth and get medical, mental health, or see their attorney by video rather than having to travel through the facility and meet with somebody face to face. These upgrades will go a long way to reduce the in-person contact, keeping everybody healthy and safe. And we hope to start on these projects sometime this month. So this fiscal year so far, we've had 746 individuals participate in our road crew and 255 participate in community service. Our alternate programs allow individuals to complete their sentence while also taking account their personal situations, whether it be their recovery, job, family, what have you. Alternate programs plays an important role within the criminal justice system and allows us to maximize the use of hard job beds for those that truly require them. The Corrections Division, along with WellPath, our medical provider, has strengthened our relationship with our public health during the pandemic, which is seemingly unique compared to some of the other counties in the state. This relationship, coupled with the outstanding work of WellPath and our staff, is able to manage the pandemic. Unfortunately, our work surrounding COVID is not done. While the community is returning to a level of normalcy, we are governed by a slightly different set of rules and timelines. So our efforts towards that continue. We continue to follow our pre-screening when individuals come to the facility, as well as housing protocols to keep the general population safe. And we have increased our overall capacity from the low level it was at the start of the pandemic. And we are slowly starting to bring back and making plans to bring back such things as social visiting, church, and court arraignments. For staffing levels, over the past 5 years, we continued to aggressively hire new deputies. Most of our new deputies start out at the jail. Right now, about 58% of our deputies have 5 years or less experience. And about 34% of our deputies have only worked in the facility while under those COVID protocols that I mentioned. Over the last several years, we've seen an increase in individuals coming into our custody suffering from mental health disorders. Comparing 2018 to 2021, while our average daily population dropped significantly, the use of psychotropic medications has actually increased by almost double between those years, as well as emergency room visits and outside medical appointments. During the last 4 quarters, an average of 71% of the individuals in custody have some form of a mental health challenge or alert in our system. This is one of the reasons why we invest so heavily in our mental health programs and work with Lane County Behavioral Health in the FIT program. Even with COVID, we've maintained our mental health programs and seen a significant reduction in behavioral issues. This next year, we are hoping to increase the number of the program participants, which is currently 24 to 96, taking up essentially the entire top 3rd floor of our facility. One of the things that we offer through that program is yoga, and as we hopefully pull out of this pandemic, we're hoping to offer that to every AIC in the facility. And I wanted to share a positive story. This one is actually very recent. An individual in their mid-30s suffering from mental health disorders who had over 41 lodgings in the last 10 years. During the last lodging, we saw a great collaboration between our mental health staff, the FIT team, the MAP program, P&P, and a couple of the local providers that all pulled together got this individual into treatment and currently is doing very, very well. So it's just a small example of a win. So our future challenges and opportunities. As I mentioned, there's a significant population with mental health issues. We're going to continue to find ways to reach out and connect with our community partners, especially the FIT team, and work with those folks to hopefully someday realize a stabilization center and the continued development in our crisis system. While we're able to do some technological upgrades with our ARPA funds, we still have some concerns to address. The age of our facility lands us in need of substantial repairs. For example, sections of our roof are over 30 years old and failing. The housing area known as intake is slowly sinking into the ground, causing daily necessary repairs to keep the doors functioning and the plumbing functioning, etc. And last year, we had a building needs analysis completed that kind of took us out 20, 30 years and more. Part of that analysis was looking at future jail capacity needs for this area based upon population trends and daily AIC population trends. It was noted that by 2040 we will have a need for a 525 bed facility. However, a key component to face those needs is the ongoing work that our pretrial and our alternative programs do. With these components, the need for a much larger facility is evident. However, to complicate matters, the footprint that our building sits on doesn't lend itself to much expansion, which kind of leads us to the future building needs. However, with the expansions we've done in MP and the sheriff's work crew and the sit-in program and our pre-trial services, we've been able to mitigate some of that need. And then finally, the jail operating levy is set to be renewed in 2023. We understand the importance of getting our message out and showing folks what we do in our facility. It's one of those things that most people don't really know that they can come see or pay attention to. So we've increased the number of facility tours we've been doing, reaching out, thinking outside the box, bringing in groups that we wouldn't normally bring in. This weekend we're bringing in 23 EPD Citizen Academy graduates to take a tour. And we hold a Q&A session before and after, and hopefully get the message out and share with people what we do in that facility. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Chief Deputy Waltershoot.
I'm gonna go off script for just a second and say, this corrections division presentation was actually prepared by another one of our lieutenants, Lieutenant Greg Rice. And he fell ill this week, so Jason kind of last minute stepped up to do the presentation, so thank you, Jason, for doing it. As we talk about the Lane County strategic plan, I think it's kind of obvious that the Sheriff's Office is vital for a safe and healthy county. The role of the Sheriff's Office allows for vibrant communities and robust infrastructure. What I'm actually going to kind of focus upon is our people and organizational health. The Sheriff's Office continually invests in its greatest resource, our employees who serve our community. There's constant thought and planning in the mentoring, developing, and training of our staff. There's intentional and purposeful succession planning, and the Sheriff's Office has a formalized career development program that acts as a mentoring program for future leaders within the organization. The Sheriff's Office continues to foster its family environment by prioritizing employee wellness and development. We find innovative ways to recruit and retain employees. I talk about this because I think some of you have heard me say before that it's kind of hard to recruit when maybe we're not the highest paid organization, law enforcement organization in the area, and we had some budgetary issues, it seems like, compared to other law enforcement organizations in this area. But what we sell is a culture, and we do well at that. We have a family feel culture here at the organization, and like our missions and values say, we are sworn to protect the citizens of Blaine County, and we're honored to serve them. As we talk about performance measures, one we've kind of hit on already. We are implementing phase 2 of the 2013 Public Safety Repair Plan. However, even with that great advancement in our patrol services, we're still 0.19 deputies per thousand compared to the rest of the county or state average of 0.36. Another one of our strategic plans I wanted to hit is that we still recognize that our citizens have a right and deserve to have a police response when they call us, and that we're still missing the mark by still sending citizens self-report forms as to act as their police report. We're hoping as we increase these deputy levels that we're going to lower that number of CSRs that we're sending out to people. Another one of our goals is we have statutory requirements when it comes to public records requests. Those have to be answered within 15 days, and our goal is to get that down to within about 10 days to provide the service to that the people deserve. Our goal is always to maintain a reasonable number of jail beds by using alternative program options and to see what we can do to reduce the number of capacity-based releases within our correctional facility. We have continued to maintain our levy promise that we have not CBR'd any Measure 11 offenders. One thing I wanted to kind of comment on after watching DA Perlow's comments about the 125 Measure 11 releases is I want to clarify that those were not CBR releases. Those were a byproduct of the courts doing court releases in response to the pandemic. It was not a CBR situation. We have not failed or lied to the community in any way and continue to make our promises whole when it comes to our public safety levy. And then our our electronic monitoring program, availability, for pretrial defendants is essential for reducing our jail population while providing individuals the ability to maintain employment, housing, and community ties while maneuvering through the court system, but also ensuring that they are abiding by their release conditions if they're suitable for release in the first place. So we use a risk management system as we make determinations about who should be on those programs and who shouldn't be. We have a robust program for alternative programs to include our electronic monitoring program, but that only works if we have sufficient number of jail beds maintaining custody of those who should remain in custody. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Sheriff Harold if you guys have any questions. And we also have Captain Mann and Captain Riley and Debbie Holler, our finance manager, available for any questions anybody has. So.
Excellent. Questions for the sheriff or his staff?
Can you share a little more about the accreditation process? I know public health went through it, it's pretty laborious. So what it does for us, does it make resources or grants available being accredited? Is it a requirement? Just a little more about that process and what it yields us.
So that's a good question, and I'm not sure that there's an answer to that question. Accreditation has been kind of popular and had kind of ebb and flow over the last 20 plus years throughout law enforcement throughout the United States. I think it was more of a mechanism to say, hey, we're hitting the benchmarks that people say we're supposed to be saying, the various associations say we're supposed to be hitting. I feel like that the Sheriff's Office was doing that as before. In fact, it seems like as we're submitting our policies and procedures to the accrediting body, that we're already where they say that we need to be. So it could be that downrange that the grants will not be coming to organizations who are not accredited. And frankly, there's a pretty big investment in cost and time on that with limited resources. Like, we were doing a good job and decided not to go down that path, but now there's statutory requirements, so.
I think the legislative intent was really to make sure that universally across the state, police agencies had appropriate policies in place. And so we have a long history of having the Oregon jail standards for our corrections division. So every 2 years, we go through what is the same as an accreditation, posting proofs and all of those things. And so we've just not ever done that on the police side. Super thankful that Carl jumped on applying for this grant. Some of you in the room may know Tim Doney. He was a former Springfield police chief, and he's retired. And we actually were able to contract with him with those grant monies because we just don't have, nobody has room on their plate in the office. So he's helping us get through this first one, and then of course, maintaining that should be easier.
Excellent. Other questions? Commissioner Burning.
Two, Mr. Mokrahysky, I've heard facilities issues mentioned now by both these presentations. I had the pleasure with Commissioner Bozovich, my rookie year, to try and deal with that. My understanding is there's still dollars that may be available. Are we looking at any kind of a time frame for putting that up for voters again, reassessing what we propose, et cetera, because it seems to cut across presentations.
Yeah, it's, you heard both from the district attorney and the sheriff's office about the significant challenges. We've known this is a challenge. We said it several years ago, for several years prior to the request of voters. Worked really hard to get funding from the legislature, and we're not successful in getting support from local taxpayers, but the problem has not gone away.
Right.
We have continued to make investments in the facility, and I believe there's a new elevator in the building. Is there a new significant repairs to the elevator that have happened?
In the jail.
Point being, we're gonna piss away money on this whole
courthouse.
building till we have a new building.
You're referring to the courthouse,
Yeah,
Commissioner.
but, yeah.
The public elevators are getting refurbished, okay.
Yeah. Other repairs in the building, in the courthouse, that have happened in the last 2 years?
You changed the light bulb at the building.
They did fix the bathroom that was flooding one side of the.
You caught me lead.
Yeah.
And we should clarify, the most recent flood that was mentioned was not wastewater, so
Yes.
that's movement in the right direction.
Literally. I'm sorry, I'm gonna move off of this. The second thing, the second thing we've heard twice in this presentation is the length of time to respond to calls, to emergency calls. With the addition of the 4 5-year positions in rural Lane County and then the 8 additional deputy sheriffs, is there any estimation to how much, if at all, that's going to cut response time to emergencies?
I think it's really hard to estimate. The biggest boost to that I got to share with the board previously, but one thing is I had 3 deputy sheriffs who had job offers from the state police, and the day that the board voted to give us that SRS ad, they all told the state police no thanks, they would stay. So that speaks to workload and just the folks are working. I mean, when you saw the little 3 guys racing around the county, that's what they do. They really do. And so I can tell you, speaking from experience, the day that you come to briefing and there's 4 instead of 3 is huge, just internally. So we know that workload for our employees is going to be better, but speaking to
You really can't.
realistically,
Yeah.
it's just really hard to say. I will tell you this, my police captain got called out at 4 a.m. because I had 2 units available, going to a call in Santa Clara. It was a 911 emergency, domestic violence, and there was no other police agency available to assist the 2 deputies that I had, and they were at Highway 58 miles 20. This happened 2 weeks ago. So they're traveling down Highway 58. They've got a 911 emergency in Santa Clara. Both Eugene and Springfield police were too busy to assist, and so the captain got called home and put on his clothes to come in. Now, that happens in super small towns all the time. For a county of 380-some thousand people, it's just kind of crazy, but that's what we do.
Thank you. Mr. Weber, you got a question?
Well, just, a lot of it's already been gone through here, but I think Carl, you said that there were 27 new hires in the last year, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
How, again, not to be negative, but how many left? retired, or are you gaining anything, I guess?
We're gaining, but obviously, I mean, thank you, board. We have positions that they've given us that we haven't yet filled. I mean, recruitment for law enforcement in particular is challenging because there's a lot of statutory requirements on what you have to do. There's a lot of parts of the process that you're required to do, which is what we want for professionalism, but it's a slow process. You know, there's a physical agility test that's required, there's a written test that's required, there's an oral board, there's the psychological fitness exam, there's a medical, and each one of those things, frankly, some of those are outside of our control of how quickly we can get them, because we're depending on other professionals, to include medical professionals who have gotten a lot harder to access in the last 2 years. So we're gaining, but we're also kind of at a shift where a good chunk of our agency is at retirement age. I mean, all of us within here are at the tail end of our career, and there's a big divide in our organization because of the 08 and 12 layoffs. So we have young people and we have old people. So.
But you have 12 openings, as I understand, for deputies. Is that what I understood?
That's correct, and we're aware of at least 4 other deputies who are going to retire in the near future. So it's always, we just have to keep our foot on the gas and keep that going. Mind that we have, you know, we're a fairly large office within the county, and so we have a lot of employees as well. So.
I mean, 12 will certainly help to get up the .19 to .36, but it's actually a drop in the bucket to get
That
what
12,
other counties are.
That 12 won't impact that .19 to 136 at all, because we're counting.
That's right, you said it was, yeah.
That. We're counting every position
Yeah,
in
so
the
that-
.19, so.
So there's a ways to go for that to happen.
Yeah.
Commissioner Traeger.
I just, when Commissioner Burney said that, just one thought that kind of ties both the facility, substandard facilities with the response time, which is the pre-first responders is the dispatch, and I had the opportunity to tour down there, and those folks are doing phenomenal work. I mean, they're really the first responders, right, the pre-first responders. And I was especially moved by, not only as a work site, what a tough environment that is to do that stress level of work in, but because this building isn't seismic standard, the folks down there were telling me, like, when the fire alarms go off in this building, they don't evacuate unless somebody comes and tells them, yes, actually this building is at risk and on fire, because they're taking the calls for whatever's going on that's making those alarms go off. And the thought of what our community response will be if that goes down in a seismic event was pretty sobering. So I think that's just something the general public has no sense of in terms of the urgency and the need that everybody would be affected if we don't do better with our facilities.
Commissioner Park.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm going to just telegraph a couple of questions once again, rather than belabor you with trying to provide answers in this small amount of time that we have. First thing I'm going to say is regarding the jail tours. Lieutenant Moore, you talked about the jail tours and how that's in the future. It's also in the present. I've been on a number of the jail tours, more than a small handful, with the city councilors who've never been on jail tours before, with the chair, the president of the Chamber of Commerce, whose eyes were open wide on a jail tour. And one thing that we all notice on jail tours is that provide a very high level of particularly mental health services and behavioral health services, not just clinically, but also in systems. We know about that. And you know, I'll ask you to talk a bit more about that when we have more time, but that's something that you report on pretty regularly. I think everybody at this table knows that you're doing a superb job in terms of stabilizing people who are forced into the jail through the system. But my question is surrounding Medicaid. We know that when people are sentenced to a jail term, they lose their Medicaid. They're no longer on the Oregon Health Plan. So that's the people of Lane County fund that, fund the medical and mental health services. So I'm going to ask you a question regarding what is the fiscal impact of not having Medicare available to the people who are inmates in the jail. And I know that you're working on it. It's something that we're treading down the road to get Medicare available. But I think it's really quite a bit of money. I'm looking at Debbie who seems to be nodding a little bit on that. But what I should answer that right now, you can answer generally about that, but that'll be a question on one of these sheets.
Yeah, we've been having conversations already with WellPath about the efforts to change that. And just a little clarification, it's impacting not only sentenced, but pretrial.
Yeah.
And so the argument to both the state and the federal government, particularly with pretrial offenders, they haven't been convicted. They're incarcerated but not convicted, and so taking away their Medicaid doesn't seem logical. And so the argument is to waive it for all in custody and local corrections facilities, but if we can't get that, then at least pretrial offenders.
Right.
And the reality is, in our jail, we don't use hard jail beds for sentenced to local time offenders very often. We use road crew, because we have limited beds, so to the extent we can, we use alternate programs. So we've communicated with WellPath, how would this change our relationship? And I would say their response was sort of mind-bending, like, we're not sure. So we'll continue to work down that path and figure out what that might look like if WellPath providing the service was able to bill for those services.
Yeah, how much more can we do? And, once again, I didn't expect you to answer that in detail, but this will provide that question. The second is regarding the pretrial releases, 125 Measure 11 or violent offenders who are released pretrial. Now, they're not guilty. They've not been found guilty yet. So these are people who really haven't gone through the code of law. But the courts are the ones who are determining, as well as COVID, but and I believe it was Senate Bill 48, was it, or that?
Senate Bill 48 is coming to be implemented July 1. We've had folks from nearly every other county in the state come visit our jail because of Senate Bill 48. Largely, the legislature through Senate Bill 48 told counties they need to do stuff that we've been doing. So we're pretty unique. We've had court release officers operating in our jail since I was hired in the 90s. We're one of the only county jails that has court release officers that are actually, they're state employees, they're not employees of the sheriff. And so they make release decisions with the delegated authority of a circuit court judge. So when COVID hit, most other jails do not have that. And so the sheriff of that county has delegated authority from the circuit court judge to make release decisions. Well, since we have court release officers in our jail, I specifically do not have that delegated authority from the courts. So these pretrial releases are a combination of the Oregon judicial system reacting to COVID. And then my understanding of these 125 Measure 11 offenders that are out pretrial, most of them have posted bail or security for release after that bail or security was reduced by a judge. So currently the state operates with a schedule, a security schedule. If you've been arrested for this Measure 11 offense, this is your security. But then a judge has the authority to reduce that. And there were many of those hearings during COVID, many reductions, and then people posting. And so of those 125 that have been released, most posted. Senate Bill 48 intends to sort of take that dollar figure out of the calculation of who should be incarcerated pretrial and who should not, and do more of a risk assessment. So the reason why we still don't know how that's going to impact us is what the bill says is that the Oregon Chief Justice will write some rules that will be pushed down, and then each county has a presiding judge. Ours is Judge McAlpin. So once he receives the Chief Justice rules, he's supposed to write rules for how it'll work in Lane County, but we have not yet seen the Chief Justice rules. So it'll definitely change pretrial, but as a county, we are really well positioned because we've had this system for some time, whereas other counties are coming to see what it is that we're doing to try and prepare for Senate Bill 48.
I don't know. Well, my question will also ask if there's a tracking of repeats by some of the people who have been released. Now, once again, they're not guilty, but we can presume that a large number of them ultimately might be found guilty. And are they out, causing harm to people?
Yeah, and I just one quick comment to add context to that. So we're talking about someone who's arrested for rape. And they're incarcerated, and then they're released pre-trial. So they have not gone through the court system to be found guilty, but they do have a victim out there who is alarmed when they are released from custody. And so when we're talking about Measure 11 pre-trial release, I just wanted to comment, that's the context to that pre-trial release. We're not talking about all crimes, we're talking about Measure 11 crimes.
Thank you, Sheriff. And I want to look at Captain Ryan and say thanks for the tours, man. I'll tell you, they're really informative, eye-opening. I love it.
A couple questions for myself. To clarify one of the slides,
My turn, I'm driving the Beatles.
He's dating himself.
I understand the context of an old jail building and so forth. The voters supplied a levy for operations of the jail. And then I see in the notation there the word deferred maintenance, and most people in context of operations consider keeping things maintained as part of that. So can we talk about just how I explain that to people about how we have deferred maintenance when we've been having an operational budget to handle the jail to some extent?
Yeah, so the first comment I will make is the deferred maintenance has been deferred for so many years. But then I think, I'll be honest, when we were having conversations, before I was sheriff, but early in the conversations about the levy, boy, we worked so hard to earn the trust of the voters and said over and over again, jail beds, this is for jail beds, that I think we were ultra cautious about how we spent those dollars and probably didn't think about it the way you just described it, to be honest.
And I'm happy to explain it to people just like that.
Yeah.
So I'm not pointing any fingers or anything like that, but it's just good to be able to explain that to somebody, the context and drawing the connection to that.
I can add one piece of that, like in '08, we probably had a roofing plan to replace the roofs like every year and ongoing maintenance, and when we fell off the cliff in '08, all of a sudden our plan became a totally different plan. Roofs were no longer like a priority in '08. And then when it happened again in '12, so as we got the jail levy, and some of you came on the tour a few years ago, and we actually had roofs leaking, and we were talking about this roof's original from 1979, this one. We're trying to now all of a sudden we have some funding, and we're trying to catch up from what was needed in '08 and what became an emergency in '08. Like in our basement right now, all of our underground original piping is rotting away. So we literally need to shut the basement down, tear up the flooring, replace everything. It's like that's the kind of maintenance that we need done. So,
And those are projects we coordinate with the county's capital fund, roofing, those really big projects. So we do have maintenance personnel, employees in the jail that are funded with levy funds to keep the lights on and
Right,
the
these are
water.
more significant.
yeah.
Another question, I always like to check in on those contract relationships, specifically with like Benita and Crestwell and so forth, and how they're doing. Are they keeping their staffing levels level, or and so forth, increases, decreases?
They maintain the same. We go out, we make sure we take care of them. They're paying for a service, and then we have a deputy in the seat.
My question was, they're still be able to pay? Are they still able to pay?
Yeah,
So-
I'm not aware of any change.
In fact, there's conversations in Benita about upping their levels right now, so.
Yes, that would be my next question.
We recently were invited out to a Lowell City Council meeting, a very small city of Lowell, they're trying to grow. And it's sort of interesting, I talked to the city council in Lowell and the Eugene Chamber of Commerce within 2 weeks of each other. And one of the things that was sort of fascinating to me is small town, big city, but the concerns are the same. The perception of safety is the same. And so had a good conversation with Lowell, they've looked at what we've been doing in Crestwell for years. I think there's a sense of being sort of frustrated that they're so small that they, in order to feel like they have any response, have to come up with something. But they're traveling that, and City of Crestwell uses a public safety fee tacked onto their utility. City of Anita is headed that direction. City of Lowell's talking about it, so that's sort of becoming a funding mechanism for public safety. And we've seen it in lots of other places. Marion County actually has a West Salem district for sheriff's deputies. It's an area that you wouldn't know you weren't still in Salem, but it's patrolled by the sheriff's office. And it pays for 10 deputies, I think, and they did that with a fee, a per house fee.
And then one more general question, probably for the sheriff. So, we have, at this stage, we have what was pre-pandemic, and then we had pandemic, and now we're not post-pandemic, but we're kind of in that. As far as the volume of service calls, types of service calls, and so forth, that's been, it seems to be, just from a citizen standpoint, a bit of a roller coaster. It's changed kind of throughout the pandemic a little bit. How would you characterize it now? And to put a little context around that, I do kind of feel in certain situations like, I don't know, you call it human behavior, but some people just aren't acting very nice these days. Whether that's hangover from the pandemic or whatever, that's going to go away, I don't know. But where do you see it as from the sheriff's office and the types of services you're called on to do?
Yeah, I think my first comment would be we didn't really notice that much change, predominantly because we only go to the in-progress life safety stuff. And so from a patrol perspective, the pandemic didn't necessarily impact them. Now the jail impacted tremendously, and those folks have been working their tails off because of it, but not that much impact from a patrol perspective. When it comes to human behavior, and I wish I'd have looked at the latest report from Shauna, but I would say my sense is that, yes, there's higher levels of aggravation on the part of, we're still going to the same type of call, but maybe the intensity is up a bit. And then there's just no doubt about it, responding to intoxicated, and back in the day that meant drunk, but it doesn't anymore. Intoxicated, mentally ill, that facet added into what was already, generally speaking, a family atmosphere. So, do you have any other thoughts, day to day? Or Rich, too?
No. Our deputies are awful busy.
Okay.
And this and everything, every day, you see the briefs and the stuff they're going to. Chaos at times.
Understandable. Commissioner Bosevich.
Thank you. So, one quick question, just doing some quick math. The public safety levy is about 54% of the jail operations budget. Can you describe what things will be like if we don't pass that levy next year?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, and I remember I was a detective sergeant in 2012, and some of you heard the story. We arrested an individual who killed somebody by bludgeoning them to death with a chunk of firewood. That person was released pre-trial because they were the least dangerous person that we were able to hold that particular day. And that was in 2012. Certainly, populations have gone up and whatnot. So ultimately, we would be a book and release operation. Agencies would bring somebody, we would fingerprint them and take their picture, and likely have to CPR nearly everyone. It's frankly hard to fathom. And then that affects every piece of the system. I mean, oftentimes people they sort of lose track of how that affects every piece of the system, and not just the county system, but countywide.
And just those CBRs, you basically let them walk out the back door in downtown Eugene.
Right. With no strings. So a pretrial services release has conditions. A CBR has no conditions.
Yeah. Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Well, let me just say one more time, I sure love being with you all in one room.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jay.
Quick show of hands of people who would like to have a break right now. Okay, we'll take 5. Can we do that? 5 minutes.
Find out what the expenses was.
Back at 3. Health and Human Services. Ms. Gray, you gonna take it away?
Yes, thank you. Hi, for those I have not met, I'm Eve Gray, the new Director of Health and Human Services. Today, here talking about behavioral health with Dr. Pauline Gishohi, who is our Division Manager for Behavioral Health. And I'll be here again next week to talk about all of these other divisions in yellow. There's 8 of us, but today we're focused just on BH. So these are behavioral health specific numbers here. And our state revenues, you can see, make up the vast majority of our funds, and that combined with federal hits 83%. We do have a small amount of charges or fees, 4%, and the general fund does support a portion of our commitment investigations, which Dr. Gishohi will go into in more detail later on in the presentation. Some of those programs that are associated with the criminal justice system, abuse, that type of thing. Our operating budget personnel expenses have unfortunately been flat. We are in a workforce crisis in behavioral health. We would love to see those costs increase. Of course, with behavioral health being a revenue generating department, as we bring in providers, we are able to bring in revenues. So we can sustain the increased workforce. The problem is that there is no one out there to hire. And that is a problem across the board in our community and in our state. Every behavioral health provider, every time we talk to the CCOs, it is on the top of everyone's mind. For materials and services, we are seeing a 39% decrease due to reduction in agency payments. I would say I would expect this number to change some as some of the funding from the short session is allocated to us. So just be aware that we will be seeing more dollars. Those will go out into contracts and agency payments and that kind of thing. It just wasn't included in this portion of the budget because it hasn't all been allocated yet. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. Gishohi.
Right, good afternoon, everybody. I have the honor and privilege of presenting behavioral health. So this work we do with a lot of our partners. We can't do this work alone. So I'm representing a lot of people who help me do this work. So for behavioral health, we have 2 very distinct programs. We have the adult outpatient program, and that serves most of our population is the severely persistently mentally ill. You'll hear us talk about SBMI. So we're seeing the most vulnerable, the highest acuity in the community. And then our other program is the child adolescence program, which we operate out of MLK. So the 2 programs are out of MLK campus. But we also have a school-based mental health program. So we have clinicians stationed in the school for that support for mental health. So for the adult outpatient, we have unique or specialty programs. The forensic is one of our growing program, and I'll talk about that in the next slide, because that's the kind of the population that actually puts us in the public safety category. So I'll talk about that in a minute. And then we have a medication-assisted treatment that is also expanding, and that focuses on opioid treatment. And then we do have a little bit of mental health crisis services, but the bulk of those for our larger community is subcontracted with Whitebird Cahoots. But we do a little bit of the crisis response at our clinic. And lastly, we have our adult protective services, and this is a very small program that does abuse and neglect in investigations for most vulnerable. So in terms of community systems, we do partner very heavily with Trillium Behavioral Health, Pacific Source as our 2 CCOs. We actually have 2 teams that are Lane County employees that are embedded with the CCOs. If you all remember, we used to be MHO. We called those that group Lane Care. So we've split those into 2 who are embedded with Pacific Source and others that are embedded with Trillium. And they're just doing the kind of work that we were doing before, but doing it for the CCOs now, subcontracting with us. We have choice. This is largely a group that is under the civil commitment program. Mostly these are people who are unable to care for their needs. So they're by and large very dependent on the system. So we have that system of making sure that they're doing okay, making sure that we are coordinating services for them. And then we have the older adult behavioral health that is also under Lane Care, who also do a lot of our system wraparound work. So for our budget, we currently have 176 FTE, so it's a growing program. And as you can see, we do have a deficit in our budget this year. We are confident that we're going to be structurally balanced. We'll be working on balancing that in the next few weeks. Fortunately, we do have reserves that we can use to help operations while we work on balancing the budget. So this is our mandated forensic programs. Like I said, those are the ones that we work with our sister criminal justice programs agencies. So this is aid and assist. So these are folks who are have committed a crime but unable to aid in their defense. So when they are in our program, we are working with them to help them gain competency. So this is treatment focused on them regaining competency so they can understand what is being brought against them. This, unfortunately, is one of our biggest and largest growing population. It's one that's also very bottlenecked at the state hospital, and one that we have really focused to try to change the direction that this is going. Because unfortunately, this is one way that I see us really criminalizing mental illness. So what I hear a lot is that the only way that people can get assistance is if they go through the 370 route, which is really sad and unfortunate. But that's kind of where we are, and hoping to change that momentum to where we can utilize civil commitment better and where we get people to the services that they really truly need. Because under 370, people are not really getting the treatment that they need. The goal for 370 is just to regain competency. And once they can understand their charges, understand, what a courtroom looks like, who a judge is, then they're deemed competent. Their mental illness is still largely unaddressed. So that's the system we're talking about. And the other one is pre-commitment investigation services. So these are folks that are a danger to themselves and others are unable to care for themselves. So we provide this service at our clinic. We are doing the investigations. And once somebody is found a danger to themselves or others or unable to care for their basic needs, they are then placed under a civil commitment for up to 180 days. So they can either be at the state hospital if they're acute need for hospital beds, but acute need for a hospital stay. But we also have folks who are civilly committed who we are also maintaining in the community, who are stable enough to be managed in the community. We have the Psychiatric Review Board, our PSRB population, and this is folks who have committed crimes, so they have been found guilty except for insanity. Again, we do have this population at the state hospital and some who we are managing after a lengthy stay at the state hospital who are stable enough to be in the community. We have a few homes that are managing this population with our oversight, the clinical oversight and coordination of services. We do have jail intercept community courts, and these are low crimes, and the goal here is to help them not recidivate, reduce them being back in the system. So we are helping them kind of divert from the criminal system. And lastly, our adult protective services, that's the investigation for abuse and neglect. So before I go to this, one quick note for the forensic side of the house. This is also one of the programs that has been underfunded for a long time. The services that we provide to are mostly care coordination, which is not reimbursable. And if it is, it's at a very low rate. So fee for service is not sustainable for these programs, but yet they are mandated programs. But what I would say, the good thing is that we've been looking at these with the state and looking at potential models that we could look at for case rate reimbursement to look at how to better serve this population, because it's been underfunded for a very long time. So in terms of changes, we look for our medication-assisted treatment program, looking at a dispensing system that is required by the DEA. We are in conversations with a potential provider to make sure that we are in compliance with that. So we are in that RFP phase, looking at trial to see if that works for what the requirements are and what the needs are for the clinic. And we also are very focused on continued integration for primary care and behavioral health. Luckily, we are co-located with primary care, so trying to strengthen the coordination of care between primary care and behavioral health, and utilizing primary care when we can to transition them to those people that are not needing the specialty behavioral health, that we can transition them to primary care for continued services. So our key initiatives for this coming year are, the first one we are looking at is diversifying our population served. So historically, we have been the safety net for our community. So I said we are seeing, or we are primarily focused on this SPMI population. So these are the most chronic, the most acute are the ones that we end up seeing at our clinic, which is a good thing. We are providing a very much needed service to our community. But what this does is it's burning up our workforce. So people can only do this work for so long and they get tired and move on. So what we're trying to do is have a balance where we have other populations that are episodic, that they come in, they get better and move on. That is something that we are not seeing at our clinic, which there is a sense of reward when you see somebody moving on and doing better. And for the last few years, we haven't seen that. We're just really focused on crisis after crisis, acuity after acuity, and this is really costing us our staff. And what we see is people who come in and then do this work for a few years and they move on. We also see this, especially now with the workforce crisis. What we see is people, staff that are very green, very inexperienced coming out of school, and we are then asking them to do this really hard work. And again, they just do it, and as soon as they get their license, they move on to doing something else. So we hope that by diversifying our population, that will retain our workforce. So that's our focus for the next year. We are also looking at housing for our this population, the SPMI. What we don't have currently is that continuum of care. We've lost a lot of residential treatment beds, so we are hoping that we're going to be able to build our capacity with a lot of the investments that came out of our last 2 sessions. We are hoping that we'll be able to review capacity for adult foster homes, residential treatment homes, secure residential treatment facilities, and for those people who are able to leave some type of supportive housing with a wraparound, that we'll be able to do that. That is also a focus. Unfortunately, for the first time in my career, there's a lot of money for this. So we are hoping that we'll find providers who are willing to do this work. We are also looking at our crisis center. I know a lot of you are aware of that. We are at the phase of finding a facility. So the goal or the vision for what we need for the community is a 24-hour facility, no wrong door, that anybody in a mental health crisis will be able to be triaged through this facility. So we are looking at a facility that will serve both adults and youth, and at any one time we are looking at a facility that will serve 42 clients. So that's in the works. And we are also looking at improving substance abuse access. One of the gaps that we have at our clinic is that we are only licensed for mental health. And a lot of our the population that we serve is dual diagnosed. So I would say probably maybe more than 85% is dually diagnosed. So it just makes sense that we would provide the 2 services under the same roof, because what we are doing now is doing mental health, and then we send them out to for substance abuse treatments somewhere else, and chances of them following up with that is very, very small. So I've been working with the state on how to certify a clinic to be able to do that. The good thing is we are actually in the middle of our state audit right now, and they are looking at a payment model that will combine substance abuse and mental health at a higher pay, which will be great. So as soon as we are able to get certified, we'll be able to provide those services at our clinic for a higher pay. And then workforce recruitment is huge for us. So looking at development, retention. Again, fortunately, we do have investments that came out of this last session that hopefully we'll be able to utilize to get people to our door. It's really bad right now. As of today, we have 13 vacancies for our master level clinicians, and that's a lot for our clinic. So, and we've had these positions open for months with no takers. So hoping that with additional resources we'll be a little more competitive in terms of potentially moving expenses, maybe sign-on bonuses, and just see if we can get people to entice people to work for us. I mentioned this before, so for mandated services, we are engaged in conversations with the state on case rate pay because they have not been funded for many years. In fact, our contract with the state currently does not even include 370, which is our largest population. So we've been managing this population without a lot of funding. So we've engaged with the state to see a different way of reimbursement. We're looking at what is on the table as a proposal is how they fund DD, the case rate that they use for DD clientele. It looks like it would be something similar and something that would be workable for mental health. So more to come on that.
Okay. And the connection here to the strategic plan, this is for the entire department, so I will highlight the portions that are relevant to behavioral health. You'll hear about the remainder next week when I come to talk about the rest of the department. So under Safe Healthy County, affordable housing and homelessness, Dr. Gashohi mentioned the behavioral health housing funds that are coming in. And we actually have a number of funds coming in through a number of different funding streams into different divisions. So we're in a process now of getting everybody in a room together, behavioral health, HSD, developmental disability services, the sheriff's office, community justice and rehabilitation, and we're talking about all the different funding streams, the needs in our housing continua for all the different populations, and how we can best maximize and utilize the funds so that we're not duplicating efforts in particular. So very excited about that collaborative work. Under behavioral health, behavioral and community health, of course, we talked about the stabilization center, very big project for us and very important to our community. This is the key to pulling our community members who are in behavioral health crisis out of the emergency room and out of the jail, is having a place where we can take individuals who are in behavioral health crisis. That's not one of those two places. So we are very excited about that work. As is our law enforcement community and our healthcare community. In the South Lane Clinic, which we are anticipating starting construction on and hopefully completing construction on this coming fiscal year, we will have integrated behavioral health services, so that's going to help expand additional behavioral health capacity into rural areas. As well as mobile services. There is a big focus on that, with behavioral health being one of the divisions that's looking at enhancing mobile services. Again, really targeting more difficult to reach locations, rural communities. Our FIT team and FUSE programs are very important in that intersection between behavioral health, criminal justice, and often homelessness. So we will continue to invest in those programs. And expanding behavioral health services, really needing to think about diversifying what it is we're doing so we can protect our workforce from the burnout that they're experiencing. Under vibrant communities, of course, workforce development, we'll just say it over and over again because that's key. We are starting tomorrow a department command center on behavioral health staffing. We are bringing in folks from across the county to be looking at what are the short-term and long-term recruitment and retention strategies that we need to be implementing. We'll be putting, in our initial operational period will be 1 week. We'll be meeting back weekly to assure that we're making progress on that plan and moving quickly on our recruitment efforts. So it's all hands on deck regarding behavioral health staffing right now. Equity is a very important part of our work, particularly the equity lens implementation in behavioral health services. Although there's also some work going, which is pretty cool, on a trauma-informed approach to looking at our facilities and asking people with lived experience to come in and look around and tell us what is triggered for them and how we can make our facilities more welcoming to individuals who have traumatic history and an experience of behavioral health crisis. Under robust infrastructure, we completed our Lane County Treatment Center renovation, so we are continuing our services there and enhancing services in that area. We also, I mentioned the Stabilization Center here again because of its importance. The Navigation Center will also have behavioral health services as a part of it, as a part of stabilizing individuals and preparing to move them on to their hopefully permanent destination. For our people and partnerships, all of these have applicability to all of our divisions. Under fiscal resilience and operational effectiveness, we are bringing in a new admin manager who has tremendous expertise in financial forecasting, which is going to be really important to us, particularly as we're facing some funding cliffs related to one-time funds, really making sure that we are planning well and not falling off of a funding cliff. Doing more intense revenue monitoring as well, looking for additional revenue opportunities within our revenue centers that exist within behavioral health and some of our other locations to make sure that, again, we are raising revenues wherever we can so that we can cover services across the department. Procurement and expenses, we are taking a look at our procurement procedures. Really, now is the time to go back and look at all the contracts that have been signed during COVID, make sure that we have applied a strong procurement lens, that we are that we are the most efficient and effective in our procurement of resources, and also that our expenses, we feel comfortable that we have policies that are governing how we're spending all of our funds in an appropriate way. So we have a lot of work to do on that this year. Employee resilience, I think we've talked a lot about, very important within this division. And internal and external partnerships also, really not just in our cross-departmental groups, but in groups like the Mental Health Summit, where we're bringing in community members from across the county to talk about the important issues, make sure we're all aligned, and how to address the problems that are facing our county is a big priority for us as well. So, with that, what questions do you have?
Questions from the committee? Mr. Bosich.
Sure. First, Pauline, you kind of mentioned forensic side was your public safety. Really, everything about this department is public safety. You know, helping people keep themselves safe for themselves and keeping other people safe from them. You know, and good mental health is a public safety issue. The interesting part, though, is that forensic part is the place where you guys see a drain on your budget. Although I'm hearing that, you know, you can bill for a lot of your services, yeah, but if we could stop some of the bleeding, you might have enough resources to maybe bump up salaries, et cetera, to attract workforce, because that's really the issue here. Because even if you had more money, it's all about getting the workforce in the door. So, you know, I know that NACO and all sorts of people are pushing for reform of Medicaid, because that 370 population, as soon as they're, you know, quote, in custody, and when they're remanded for aid and assist, they're still, quote, in custody, aren't eligible for reimbursement. So you can't bill any of that service. So that's a huge thing. But I'm kind of curious about, you know, some other possibilities, the opioid settlement funds and Measure 110 implementation, and where some of those funds may come into our behavioral health, and is that look like it's going to help you guys out, or is that, you know, just you don't know yet because no one's written rules yet? I know there's a task force on the opioid distribution that you know, people are on, and in fact, I think AOC's recruiting, you know, county commissioners sit on that. So, you know, we're still yet to come. But any thoughts about those future revenue streams?
Measure 110, I don't know that we are going to see a lot of benefit from in our county. The opioid funds, there are funds that have been allocated to the county, and we will be, I'm sure, meeting here pretty soon to be talking about what the governance structure will be and making recommendations to the board around how to allocate those funds. It will be up to the Board of County Commissioners in terms of how those funds are expended. And of course, there's lots of great arguments about why to spend it all kinds of different places, and behavioral health is a great argument. So I think.
And it's the same with Measure 110, although as far as the county, we probably won't be getting any of it for this go around. Our community did go to get together into what the state is calling BURNS, Behavioral Health Regional Networks. So the communities that are providers that provide mental substance abuse treatment especially did go for after this money. So we are waiting to see what we will be awarded as for the region, for Lane County. So those have not yet gotten to us. I think we started with some of the smaller communities, is my understanding. So a few communities have been awarded, but the larger communities are still waiting.
I look forward to that system becoming more robust, because we certainly need those treatment beds for particularly the A&D.
Right, and we do have the highest per capita aid and assist population in the state here in Lane County.
And just before we get off the aid and assist, just to remind the audience, those clients aren't just from the county, you know, felony court system. They come from municipal courts. In fact, the bulk of our aid and assist population comes out of Eugene Municipal Court.
Yep.
Commissioner Burning.
I'm just gonna ask a question. Workforce is getting 200 million in the state. Are you already engaged in discussions with our local? If you could share, not here and now, but later this with me, because I'm on the executive board of that, and I would like to work with you in that regard.
Sure. That's great. We have a grant application that we're submitting for those funds.
Please let me know.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Other questions? Commissioner,
Please.
yes. Ms. Lazo.
I have a question about, two questions. One, just specifically medical assisted treatment, and what the waiting list is for county services on that.
We actually currently don't have a wait list. We are able to get in people. We expanded our services, added buprenorphine program. So we are accepting new clients, and we are seeing people starting to come back now that we are more open to face-to-face.
When did that shift?
interaction. I want to say maybe the beginning of the year. Yeah.
And then another question has to do with rural areas throughout the county. The stabilization center is important, and I'm glad that we're moving forward with it, and presumably it'll be located in Eugene or somewhere in the metro area. I just thinking about the rural areas, and I heard you talk about mobile units. I know there's been a pilot in Florence, and there's one headed for Cottage Grove. Will they all be sort of cahoots based, and how many are we thinking, and what's the timing, and how far out rural is it going to reach, and when? I think there's just a great need out in the rural areas.
Yeah, there is a great need, and we are kind of building up onto what we started in Florence. So making sure that they're stable, that they can manage, although we're still having to provide some funding to support them. So in terms of timelines, I would want to say, say we want these mobile crises across all our rural communities. And that is actually the mandate from the state, with the implementation of 988 coming in July. So 988 is the equivalent of 911 for mental health. So there's going to be a central hub where anybody experiencing a mental health crisis can call, and then that call center then will be triaging and connecting the individuals with the right people. So we're still in conversations about how that will work within the structures that we already have. So for the mobile crisis in the rural communities, they're not necessarily going to be exact Cahoots model, but it's a Cahoots-like. So it will be kind of similar to what we have in Florence. So it's a master level clinician paired with a peer or a case manager who are going out to intervene in a crisis. So that will probably be kind of what we'll be able to do in the rural communities. So we are partnering with the hospitals, the sheriff in those communities. So our next one that actually has an RFP out is South Lane, that we are looking for a provider to be able to do this work. The next one will be probably Veneta. They've expressed an interest and are ready for it. And then we've also had interest from Coburg and Junction City. So that will be kind of how we'll be going next, depending on the availability of funds and staffing. Actually, staffing is our biggest hurdle right now.
And maybe even housing for the staff.
And housing for the staff. Yeah. Yeah.
Commissioner Park.
Very briefly, because I know Commissioner Krieger has a question, but when the DA made a presentation to us, she talked about how the legislature, who are not lawyers, continue to pass legislation that doesn't take into account what lawyers know. And I believe that it's the same with behavioral health services. We have legislators who are not clinicians. I know this. I was one of them. I was never a clinician. Who are passing legislation that really unfairly burdens you with high costs particularly in the mandated forensic programs that come down. You talked about 370. So I have a couple of questions that will be surrounding mandated forensic programs and the budgetary impact more specifically. And those will come to you in the form of a separate question. And they'll be on one of the pieces right here. That's a telegram. Second, you mentioned ever so briefly, almost in one breath, the mental health summit. I just want to, Pauline, you have been, Dr. Guichol, you have been amazing in guiding that particular group of people. These are judges and public safety officials, professionals, and just a vast array of the people who most are impacted by the behavioral, the intersection of criminal justice and behavioral health and housing and homelessness, we talk about all the time. You've done an amazing job, particularly in the last 2 years. Oh my God, gosh, it's just unbelievable how much you've done. So that's all. I'll ask you to elaborate on one of these cards.
Thank you. It's an amazing group of people. It makes it easy for me because they're very passionate. It's a very early morning, every third Thursday of the month, and they show up. It's at 7:30 and never fails. They're all there.
And there's no coffee, there's no breakfast.
There's no coffee, there's no food, but they show up. It's an amazing group of people.
Commissioner Traeger.
Yeah, I know we're short on time, so one, just editorializing, not only do we have legislators who aren't behavioral health specialists, but we have voters who become the legislators, and we have ballot initiatives, and that's Measure 110, and it's really not done what, I think what most voters thought it was going to do. So it's just a piece of editorializing on that situation. My question about the CAHOOTS-like and rural, I mean, to me, CAHOOTS is important because it's crisis intervention, but it's not treatment. And so when you talk about CAHOOTS model in the rural communities, we're still just talking about crisis intervention. We're still not talking about treatment, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And that's why and the stabilization center, just to your point, talking about the commitment of having it be no more than 30 minutes from it. So that's partly why will partly drive the location of it.
Correct.
Is the concentration of the number of people who need the service and then the access to the other areas. And that will be treatment.
Yeah, correct.
So the crisis gets intervened, and then people have somewhere, those interveners have somewhere to take someone.
Correct.
Yeah.
So even that rural piece is still not treatment.
Commissioner Burning.
Is there time? Is that okay?
You
Real
have
quick.
time. Should I say make it quick?
I remember last year. Make it quick. Two things on CAHOOTS. One, I have a dear friend that's worked there for a long time, and the most demoralizing thing for staff at CAHOOTS is to intervene with crisis and know that wherever they're taking people, there's really not the adequate treatment available. I also know that for cross-trained people at CAHOOTS, we're talking about a county budget, but oftentimes the county will issue RFPs for services, and sometimes those will go to the lowest bid. The CAHOOTS cross-trained specialists that intervene make $22 an hour. So as we're looking at the workforce issue for county, although it may be $2,000 for this particular meeting, I think the workforce issue for county partners that allow us to really reach into underserved or desperately needed populations is another significant issue. Thank you, Chair.
Other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Are we good to go? Other than perhaps the names. Right. Let's go ahead. Ellie's going to sit on the
These are
side.
important.
Yeah.
And I will sit.
Unlike the other ones.
This'll work.
Unlike all those unimportant ones we do.
These are important ones. It's depressing for me. Everything's under.
And of course, this was my former position at Lake County, but if folks have voted, they can go ahead and take a sticker.
I haven't told it yet.
Okay, Community Justice and Rehabilitation Services. Mr. Rickhoff, are you gonna lead us off?
Yes, I am. I'm going to start with some quick introductions. My name is Greg Rickoff. I am the interim director, the first director of Community Justice and Rehabilitation Services. Start, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Star Felty, I'm the Youth Services Division Manager.
Good afternoon, Donovan Dumar, Adult Pro Probation.
And our newest member who started on Monday, so we're not asking her to present per se, but we'll be here for questions.
Kelly Barlow, Administrative and Finance Manager.
So, and she might look familiar. She held a similar position for tech services, so I feel very fortunate to have her expertise and skills with us. I'm going to start with the department overview. You will notice, go ahead and change. It's not moved there.
There we go. It might skip forward.
You'll notice that the mission is a working title. We really are going to be taking some time here in the coming months to develop a working vision, a working mission for this brand new department. The department is organized in 4 divisions. Please note that administration includes the mediation function, which has been part of youth services for a while, but because the function really is much wider and different than the youth services mission, we'll be having that report to administration. And the fiscal division, think of as a comprehensive administrative and finance function. The idea with this new department is to provide the best possible services for justice-involved individuals, youth and adults, focus on the values, the data, the practices that make a difference in people's lives and to the community in which they belong. These 2 divisions have experienced significant transition in the recent past. They have both been parts of larger departments that have provided dissimilar range of services and have focused on missions, goals, tasks that do not naturally align themselves with the evidence-based practices essential for good supervision work. By aligning these units in a single department, it permits the creation of a focused culture with leadership better attuned to the work at hand. It allows for greater latitude as well as collaboration, supports recruitment, selection, training, and workforce support opportunities. It aligns the opportunity to engage in deep, transformative equity, access, and inclusion work. These guiding principles of evidence-based practices coming out of juvenile justice research have a great application when working with adults populations. In short, there's real synergy here with these 2 divisions. Go ahead and change. Please note, you've heard a little bit already about the Community Corrections Act. It's something that came up with both the district attorney and with the sheriff. That is state funding. The money for adult parole and probation is pass-through dollars from the state. There's 1 FTE of general fund dollars that's used for really a facilitative position in the jail that provides for a really effective handoff for folks coming out of the jail. On the youth services side, it's general fund dollars and of course the local option levy. What we're doing right now is really fairly complex extraction of funds that in some ways were intermingled with health and human services. So we're figuring things out and we have a lot of questions, not as many answers. As Steve noted in his budget presentation, the state funding for the Community Corrections Act is an outdated formula based on generalized caseload from the previous year. This current biennium means we're working on numbers that came for those who were under supervision in 2020. Although, and I know Commissioner Bosevich has mentioned this, although there's a more accurate time study based on actual evidence-based services, and we're required to do that by the state, it's not the tool that's used to allocate funding. So funding is based on statewide supervision numbers distributed by a percentage of cases in each county. There's no recognition given to the complexity or the risk of recidivism in these factors. With those 2020 numbers, driving the FY 21-23 biennium. Lane County's success in COVID testing kept the circuit court closed longer than our peer counties. It suppressed the case numbers and therefore supervision numbers. It created a significant funding gap that we used, thanks to the county. We used ARPA funds for that one-time fill. So we are approaching you today with a funding package for the adult parole and probation that is not structurally balanced. It's one of those pieces that we're going to work for. And as I mentioned really quickly, the youth services side, we've got those complexities, and we're going to be working through to understand exactly what the youth services budget picture is with this next year. Go ahead with the next slide. Just so you know, we've created in the launching of this department, we added 6 positions to the county. 3 of those we went ahead and filled in during this fiscal year. That's my position, Kelly's position, and an executive assistant position. It's really so we can effectively launch the department. We have 3 more positions coming in line with this upcoming year's budget, and those are really looking at continuous quality improvement, purchasing and procurement, and recruitment and selection tools. Some of the things that youth services needs in order to do their work that was done by Health and Human Services that now needs to be a standalone. With that, let's get into the divisions. I'm going to turn it over to Donovan to first look at adult parole and probation.
Thank you. And first, it's great to actually be in a room with y'all, so it's good to see you in person. So first, I just want to acknowledge that parole and probation services, we are passionate in our responsibility to improve the quality of life. That's not a responsibility that we take lightly. With this, we strongly subscribe to evidence-based practices in meeting the individual needs of our client population. And we do that largely through a specialized supervision strategies. We meet people where they're at and their specialized needs. We have really engaged and developed in strong collaboration with our system partners over the years. And one example of that is certainly our work in the treatment courts. We work in close collaboration with our DA's office, our defense team, the judges in that. And we also work incredibly close with a lot of other providers in the community to really meet the needs and risk of our client population. Parole and probation runs with 58 FTE, and as Greg mentioned, our expenses are greater than our resources, and so we are currently not balanced in that regard. Next slide. As it relates to the changes that we're facing currently, again, Greg mentioned that we are not structurally balanced. And with that, I will say that we are incredibly thankful for the ARPA funds that we've received. And this has absolutely kept our division operational and being able to meet the needs of the community. It's also really helped stand up our public safety system as well, and working with our partners to provide the services that really aim towards long-term reductions in recidivism. I would just absolutely thank you all for the new office that we've received. It has been an incredible blessing to our team, and it is just the morale and the impacts that I've already seen it have on our client population and meeting the responsivity, the barriers that people have has just been incredible. So thank you, and I just see that this is going to be just an incredible start to some amazing things that we're going to be able to accomplish in this space. So thank you so much. I will say also that construction is coming to an end, and so we are actively working to develop an open house for the new space. So be on the lookout for the invitation, and we hope to make a big festive event out of it. So thank you. Next slide. As it pertains to our Lane County strategic plan, we have an amazing opportunity to walk alongside with those who receive the benefit of community supervision and services. And I think what you see here is just a reflection of just some of the fruit that parole and probation contributes to our Lane County system as it relates to safe, healthy county, vibrant communities, and robust infrastructure, and our incredible partnerships. We can't do this work alone. Next slide. So as it relates to key initiatives, the 416 program has really been a milestone. We just concluded a randomized control trial of that program, and for those, just briefly, it's a collaboration with the District Attorney's Office that is really an alternative to incarceration, and it's for individuals that have drug and property offenses or histories, and that are of high risk in the community. And so really what we do is we work collaboratively with our system partners to effectively reduce the risk. We're 6 years into this program, and the study occurred 3 years and just been incredibly beneficial. We've seen an 18% reduction in recidivism from business as usual with this population. So this is a model that we are absolutely hoping to duplicate. We are looking very closely at the strengths and how we incorporate these findings from our Lane County population into our future business model. So it is effective and it definitely reduces recidivism. And again, another thanks. Our office is amazing. Just got a couple pictures there, and look forward to you all seeing it in person. Yep, moving on.
All right, let me get started. As you just heard, the important work of adult probation and parole is primarily focused on supervision. In Lane County, Youth Services is the county juvenile department and more. Youth Services is charged with responding to law enforcement referrals for youth 12 to 17 years of age, with the exception of formal legal processing of the most serious offenses, which is handled by our district attorney's office. Like adult PMP, Youth Services provides probation services. This work occurs in our supervision unit, where formal probation supervision is provided to county-level adjudicated youth. This includes specialized sex offender caseloads and a juvenile treatment court caseload as well. In addition to formal probation, the supervision unit provides pre-adjudicatory case processing for all juvenile legal referrals, a full continuum of community supervision services for justice-involved youth that occurs before formal probation involvement. So that includes informal interventions and a spectrum of diversion services. And the supervision unit also provides court investigations, conditions of release monitoring, risk needs assessments, victim advocacy, division reception, records management, and expulsions. And that's our supervision unit. Youth Services operates 24/7, 365. We have 70 staff approximately, 6 program service units, and we are housed in 3 separate buildings on the Survey campus. In addition to the supervision unit, Youth Services has 5 additional units, 4 of which are singularly complex and have significantly different functional elements. Our not as complex unit is our administration unit, and that's where I sit, and the rest of our division management and oversight and continuous quality improvement and other administrative functions are housed. In addition to this, we run a detention facility, and that unit oversees a 16-bed detention facility. This is lodging youth, including youth being held on adult criminal charges, and the unit includes the administration of a medical unit that oversees the health services for youth in detention and Phoenix, and that includes medical, dental, and mental health response. We also run the Phoenix program. That's a 16-bed behavioral rehabilitation services residential treatment program for county-level justice-involved youth. We run a school. We run a collaboration between Lane Education Service District and the division, and that's called the MLK Education Center. We provide 3 educational programs at the school. We provide an alternative school for high-risk adjudicated community youth, including horticulture and culinary arts vocational programs. We provide education in detention, and that's the Juvenile Detention Program Education, or JDEP. We provide education to the Residential Treatment Center, and that's long-term care and treatment, and that's an LTCT program. So those are distinct education programs. In addition to that, we also provide Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA, support for youth in that unit, and then that unit oversees our community service and restitution crews as well. We also have a nutrition services program. Nutrition services is a federally licensed national school lunch program, Oregon licensed school nutrition program, and that's where we house our MLK Culinary Arts vocational program as well. And nutrition services provides over 50,000 meals and snacks per year to youth housed in Detention Phoenix and youth in school and on vocational crews at and through the MLK Education Center. So that's what we largely do. The Youth Services provisional mission at this point is to hold justice youth appropriately accountable for their behavior, promote the safety and restoration of victims and communities, assist justice-involved youth to build new competencies by providing them with evidence-based and developmentally appropriate services, supports, and opportunities, with the goals of increasing competencies and protective factors and decreasing criminogenic risk factors and delinquent acts. The Youth Services Division is funded primarily by general fund, as we talked about, and through a combination of local options levies, state dollars, federal pass-through dollars, grants from multiple sources, foundation awards, assistance agreements, and fee-for-service contracts. Youth Services applied for and was awarded state legislative and county American Rescue Plan Act funding, and we're going to be receiving revenue replacement funding and funding to further the response to racial and ethnic disparities in the Lane County juvenile justice system. Next slide. Trying to go fast and get it all in. Please note the changes outlined in the slide. In addition to what is outlined, I also wanted to highlight some important recent history. Over the past 2 years, the Youth Services Division has experienced multiple significant changes. These include COVID-19 impacts on all operations, with more than 50% of our staff considered critical. As a new division manager, the addition of an assistant division manager, turnover or shift in over 50% of our supervisor positions, engaging in a transformative workplace culture initiative, beginning a continuous quality improvement initiative, and the commencement of the transition process from the Health and Human Services Department to the Community Justice and Rehabilitation Services, or CJRS Department. As already highlighted, the movement from Youth Services from Health and Human Services to the CJRS Department has exposed a number of budgetary uncertainties. It is anticipated that it will take a year or more before a clear picture of the operational costs for Youth Services emerges. Next slide, please. Youth Services applied for and was awarded Juvenile Crime Prevention, JCP, funding and state legislative ARPA funding to further the division's response to racial and ethnic disparities in the Lane County juvenile justice system. An RFP is in the works, and we're looking to procure a contracted provider to assist us with lifting that response effectively. Youth Services has initiated a deep dive into the review of our division policies and practices. We've established foundational principles, and we're in the process of securing a learning management system to provide disciplinary-specific training for all staff. These steps are representative of the division's commitment to our people and organizational health and to the implementation of evidence-based juvenile community supervision practices. Youth Services is continuing with the positive workplace culture initiative we started with Integrated Success. Sessions with staff, some also including community partners, are planned for this spring and summer. And at that time, we're going to be finalizing the division's brand. So that's going to include an updated mission, vision, values, and establishing a code of conduct for our staff. These sessions are designed to support our people, improve organizational health, and support vibrant communities by partner collaboration. Next slide, please. All right. Youth Services recently started a 3-year evidence-based continuous quality improvement process with performance-based standards, or PBS, in 3 settings or sites. That's our detention unit, our Phoenix Treatment Center, and reentry, which is part of our community supervision unit. PBS is a nationally recognized program and has been implemented by multiple jurisdictions nationwide and in Oregon. It's interesting, usually people are told that they have to engage with PBS, and we chose to engage with PBS to establish effective standards. PBS has 3 main goals. The first is to make facilities safe. Public safety and the safety of youth, staff, and visitors is the primary responsibility of confinement facilities. PBS standards and performance data focus on management practices that promote safety and well-being and minimize the risk of harm. 2, monitoring program effectiveness. The challenge for youth facility leaders is to provide programming and services that both keep youth engaged and out of trouble, and put them on the path to becoming productive, purposeful citizens with the ultimate goal of preventing future reoffending. 3, achieving positive outcomes. PBS standards and performance measures promote practices research has shown are the most likely to give youth a meaningful second chance. And this is especially true when they leave facilities like a detention or residential setting. And what we'll be implementing will stop the cycle of going in and out of facilities. And that's one of their main goals. All right. By committing to the PBRA's process of CQI as an organization, youth services is acknowledging quality improvement is not a finite process, but one that we're committed to as an organization. And we're excited to be able to do this. It matters. What matters is that, what we know is that when we do CQI and when we engage in effective evidence-based practices, that it changes lives. And this is true for youth and families and victims and communities. When we do this work well, it really, really matters. So the opportunity to establish a new department is an exciting one. And we are projecting that the recent and current changes happening at youth services and at parole and probation will build divisions and a department that's effective, healthy, innovative, and helpful to our community in meaningful ways.
All right. We have our performance measurement charts. At this point, hopefully you picked up on the fact that you're not going to find two greater champions for performance measures than Starr and Donovan. We are absolutely committed to the practices that must be based on data and research in terms of development. And the equity, access, and inclusion work can and should be informed by data. Let's keep moving to future challenges and opportunities. I think we have covered these items once we get here. I think we've worn out the battery. So the instability of the Community Corrections Act funding, you've heard a lot about that today. That is a very real piece for us to be contending with. We have heard concerns about the adult parole and probation overshadowing youth, and it truly is a non-issue. I would say the cutting edge of the work is being done in youth services nationally. It's coming out of the juvenile justice world, and adult considers itself informed by and moving towards youth practices and not the other way around. The performance-based standards is a big deal. There's going to be some additional training for staff by this nationally renowned outfit when they come back to town in June. We expect to be able to invite folks to a bit of an orientation to see how critical this element is in our future. I think Starr did a great job of talking about the uncertainty of the services budget needs as we continue to extract and understand what's going on. We will have a lot more information for you next year. Let's see, where are we? Oh, yes, and we do have some issues in terms of the age of the building and the failure of our electronic system for securing the buildings. We're actually back in the Middle Ages right now with key locks for the secure part of our facility. That is being currently upgraded, but it's really demonstrating that we have more facilities needs coming forward that we expect to hear about. And then a great deal of work going on with workforce well-being and the equity work. There really is some transformative work that we must be doing that our research has shown we need to move forward to and we're looking forward to it. So what did I miss in any of those? That's good questions.
Excellent questions from the committee. Commissioner Trader.
Do we contract the health services the medical services the way we do at the?
We do not.
No.
We have an individual who fully retired from her previous career and has done an absolutely phenomenal job as a single FTE with 52 plus policies and for her to be following. She has mentioned that she's getting close to the end of her, going for her second retirement. And I think we'll need to examine the contracting of those services in the future, just in terms of the costs that it takes to run a 1 FTE program of significant size. Anything else you did?
My only other question is, and this may be just a conversation, so I'll flag it, but when you're working with youth, you're working with a system, with a family system, whether it's family of origin or family of culture, or whoever it is. So like, where is that line if you're engaging that system? We're spending money from youth services to work with folks and their issues who are not youth, but it's affecting the youth that are in custody. So like how do you draw that line, or where are there opportunities to bring other services or refer folks elsewhere to sort of to be crude about, to get it off your books, but make sure that the folks are getting the services that bring the results you're looking for?
I mean, there's lots of opportunities. I mean, we work with partners to make sure if we identify family members, like you said, original family or chosen family, and making sure that they're getting resources if they have barriers. So we work with a number of different partners. All of the kids we serve come in through the supervision unit, so, or the back door, and come in through detention and intake. But that's what we do. We provide services to justice-involved youth. And so developing the relationships and the business of that is essential to the work we do. We have not been providing adult services, and we're just finding places to,
We do that.
They do that, right?
We love that work.
And referrals and building relationships, but, part of what I would like to see as we move forward is strengthening of those relationships.
Ms. Laza?
I have a question just physically about the 3 pods and what used to be 3 32-bed pods, and now it sounds like 2 16-bed pods.
Right.
That's halving of capacity due to COVID maybe, or just?
No, we're funded only for 16 beds.
Okay, so is it 1 pod? split?
It's a pod, yeah.
Just
right.
the 1 pod, okay.
Yeah.
So 2 are, do you use the other 2 for some of these other services?
So right now we're running a full pod on one side, and then we're running isolation and quarantine unit on the other side. So we've used both sides of the pod during COVID. They're in pod. We're running pod 1 right now because pod 2 had the chipping paint that the youth were using to self-harm, and so that has been cleaned up, and we'll be moving back into pod 2. Pod 3, we're in the process of discussing how best to use that space. We're looking at it as a store space, and then also creating a training environment that could potentially be used statewide for detention facilities. So those are some of the conversations that I've started to have with Greg. And then there's opportunity as we get the Security Control Center back up to, we're operating in the dark ages, and so it's hard to contract with outside providers because our facility doesn't meet what would be considered minimum standards, and so we're looking to correct that. And then there's an opportunity where we can expand our services to do something like a 30-day detention program, or we can contract with a provider to run something like JBAR-J, which is an alternative. It's usually, once youth graduate from us, they go to the Oregon Youth Authority. And so if they're failing on probation, sometimes before they send them to a youth correctional facility, they have a contracted service provider that will have like a 30, 60, 90-day program. And so JBAR-J operates out of Deschutes County Detention Center. And so there's opportunities. OIA is interested in building programs and opportunities like that. So potentially there are opportunities for appropriate facility use, but we have to.
And that pod 3, is that the one that's just never been utilized from the beginning? It's the same one?
Yeah, it's the one we've cannibalized for parts.
I didn't know what the numbering was.
Yeah, that's the one that hasn't been used. So that one's all down at the end, and it would take millions of dollars to rehab that pod. So it's unlikely to ever be functional as a detention area.
Yep.
But the first 2, we believe, it still have that capacity at this time.
Commissioner Bernie?
So, I know there's an answer here. We've been given 2 separate budgets of 2 different divisions that are now somehow being unified. And I want to know what the driving force behind that is. What is driving that?
I shared my perspective to which either of you like to talk about it.
Yeah, as far as the budget or
As far as
why are we making?
Oh, wow, yeah. So I can tell you over the last several months and just my opportunity to work with STAR, it's been incredible to have a thought partner in really what is proven evidence-based practices and how we do business and how business should be done. And it is amazing to have the ability to have a conversation around kind of a shared language around risk, need, responsivity. And I'm really encouraged by the fact that we are partnered in that youth really does drive the train in evidence-based practices. In fact, when we first started, John Ahrens, the former manager of youth services, actually trained us in effective practices in community supervision. So it really is the thought partner
If
piece.
that's the case, why have we done it wrong for so long?
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
we can go back to 2012, and back in 2012, which we talked about on Tuesday night, were the last round of big cuts, where the county let off nearly 100, or eliminated about 200 positions. In that same year, the youth services used to be its own department in the county. In that same year, that department was eliminated, and you served several staff, I forget how many, were eliminated and laid off during that period of time, and the department was made a division within the county's largest department, Health and Human Services. So that's what drove that move, was really budget cuts, and the theory was that we can reduce all these administrative expenses by putting this department that was justified to be its own department into another one. Parole and probation, similarly, used to be in the sheriff's office at one point.
And Health and Human Services.
And Health and Human Services. It bounced around. And when I came here in 2014, it was in county administration. I've worked in a lot of counties. I've never seen parole and probation managed in county administration. It didn't make any sense. So your point is right, that this has been a sort of a long-standing, over the past decade at least, where what we've recognized, but there's never been the right time, right? It's never felt like the right time, because we've got all these other things we're focused on, and we finally came to the point of saying, both of these operations and the people we serve through these operations deserve better. And so the result that we're proposing here is this new department.
Totally, thank you.
Sorry. No, I mean, I think there's also the progression of probation too. And so for a really long time, like when I started in my career, it was really focused on enforcement and what we would call trail 'em and jail 'em. And I did adult probation, and that was where my career started. And I have progressed through my career, and I've overseen both adult and juvenile at different points, and combined adult and juvenile. And I think that what we've learned is good evidence-based practices is good evidence-based practices, and obviously you adjust it based on your population. So you talk to kids and families different than you talk to adults who are you're serving. But the fundamentals of how people work and what creates change and how we elicit that from people is largely the same, just adjusted for population base, and that's whether it's a specialized caseload or adults versus juveniles. And so I think probation practices have also evolved to the point where this makes sense now, where it might not have made sense before.
Question answered. Thank you.
Commissioner Clark.
Thank you. Just one thing really quickly, and Dawn, I'll mention the salmon pod. We've tried through the years to do something with it because it's a vastly unused, wonderful space, including Ms. Mogreiski spent a lot of energy recently trying to rehabilitate it into a youth crisis center. Just couldn't make it work because the inherent problems with the structure itself. And so that's a part of, everybody's been frustrated by that for years and years and years. But I only have one serious question. When we were closing down businesses, O'Donnell's Irish Pub, etc., aren't you happy? I mean, are staff using the Cups coffee card that we had?
So, true story, one of our supervisors actually has a coffee, like a drink named after her. So she brought a special, it's called the Cat. If you've ever been there, so it's after Cat Collie. So if you ever go through there, just ask for the Cat. It's going to be added to the menu at some point, but it is incredible. So we go there way more than we should. So.
Well, Four Corners has been transformed pretty significantly in the last year and a half.
So it's been amazing. Yeah.
Commissioner Bosevich.
Thank you. So, the question about why they were separated, we went from 14 departments to 9 departments that year. So it wasn't just youth services that got stuck in a weird place. It was a 20% budget cut, real dollar, from year to year. So hopefully we never have to do that again. It was pretty stressful making some of those decisions, and the number of people that became unemployed was incredible. My question a little bit is about the red work you're doing. And probably only Commissioner Farr remembers this. We did a study once before. I think it was ORI or somebody that did the study, and Mr. Alltucker presented it to the board, which basically came to the conclusion that, our disproportionate population, et cetera, was mostly driven by the police agencies, not really, law enforcement, not the not our practices and our sanctioning didn't have any disproportionality to it. But when asked about the root cause of that disproportional contact with law enforcement agencies, he came to the conclusion that it's really a birth to 3 issue. And, you know, so I'm kind of curious,
Yeah.
we're going back and restudying that, but we already have a study that basically pointed out the real issue is making a change birth to 3, which, you know, I love that,
And
you know,
the-
group of people and you know,
Yeah.
the parenting and all those various issues around that, so.
We're actually responding to that study still. So that's part of what we're doing. We've been responding slowly, but what we found was that it needed funding to effectively respond to, and so that's when I sought funding. We were able to secure funding, so we're gonna do a deep dive into it. And we know that most of what drives, you know, this is another tie-in, right? Donovan's clients have kids with us, and so we know about generational poverty and crime and what that looks like in that cyclical cycle. And so it's really figuring out the information we need to be able to provide to the system of care and other community partners about the interventions that are, you know, that we need and the systems that we need. And so part of that is collecting data and doing probation well. So then we can come back and say, we're identifying not only these risks of criminogenics that we're responding to, but there are needs that are identified. And we're not the systems who respond to needs. You know, what research shows is that when you give youth who have high needs resources, they become dependent upon you. And we don't want them dependent on the criminal justice system. We want them dependent on pro-social organizations, so they don't keep reoffending to keep getting needs met. And so this is really about gathering data, having conversations about disproportionate minority contact and about needs in general. And really figuring out where are those areas within the community that we can provide information to partners so they can develop effective responses. And hopefully, you know, we'll learn from Donovan and he'll pass that stuff down onto us and we'll have the conversations about community. So I think that there's this really huge opportunity for us to just improve our community's response and get to the root of a lot of this stuff.
Great, and I will say, you know, over the course of my tenure as a commissioner, touring the facilities probably annually about until COVID, I've watched the growth of the cultural sensitivity that's gone on with the detainees and folks there in the programs and the changes you guys have made to be responsive. So you're doing great work there. And I just was kind of curious. I was hoping we weren't starting over from ground zero. So that's great. That's very great. That's great to hear.
We're going in deep. We want to do it well.
Y'all mentioned John Aaron's book, Dispatches from Juvenile Hall. Have you read that?
No, I have not.
It's a pretty interesting read.
Okay, I will do so.
Other questions? Other book recommendations?
Well, actually.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank all three of you. 4 weeks. Look around the corner. Okay, let's take a quick trip down committee business. Does anybody have anything to bring forward? Seeing none. Is Moody anything from staff?
Nothing from staff.
Nothing from staff. Our next meeting is
Okay, Thursday, next Tuesday.
next Tuesday, right here. Excellent. Meeting adjourned. We'll see you then.
Times.